Chapter 1783. Little Shuama really lived up to his expectations. Not long after she came here, she took back the territory for the fallen Devil King. The other Devil Kings were naturally dissatisfied and joined forces with other Devil Kings to suppress her. But her kung fu was not ordinary, and no one in the Devil world was her opponent. The result of her crusade was that these Demon Kings were gradually taken care of by her. She was thinking about that strange flower, but the Demon King who owned that strange flower was extremely powerful and had many experts under him. If she were to fight him alone, she would naturally be no match for him. Therefore, she needed to have a force that was on par with her. Therefore, she quietly took care of the other Demon Kings one by one. When the Devil King reacted, the little Devil Kings in the Devil world were almost cleaned up by her, and their little claws were reaching towards him. The biggest war in the history of the Devil world was caused by the confrontation between little Shuama and the powerful Devil King. After that war, the powerful Devil King died in battle, and his territory and subordinates all belonged to little Shuama. Little Shuama became the Devil King and was respected as the Devil Lord, becoming the veritable king of the Devil world. These things were easy to say, but not easy to do. From the moment little Shuama entered the Devil world until she unified the Devil world and became the Devil world's lord, she experienced thousands of years of bloody wind. After she entered the Devil world, she never saw Shinjioli again. She didn't know if he didn't find her, or he felt that she was enough to take care of herself, so he didn't look for her anymore. In the dead of night, she still missed his embrace. But the idea of growing up was firmly entrenched in her heart, so she couldn't care about anything else for the time being. She didn't know that the man in white who taught her growing up was a god, and she didn't know that he was actually standing on the opposite side of her. After she unified the Devil world, she finally got the strange flower. After eating it happily, she finally grew up in a month as she wished. From a 6 or 7-year-old little girl to a 12 or 13-year-old girl. She happily returned to the demon world, wanting to let Jioli see her grown-up appearance. But after returning to the demon world, she remembered a very serious problem. She didn't know Jioli's identity and origin, and she didn't know where he lived. He had always been the one looking for her, and she had never been able to find him. She had also asked around in the 6 realms, but no one knew who Jioli was. It was as if he had really disappeared. She had waited in the demon realm for 3 years, searching for him for 3 years, but he never came back. He was truly missing from her life. She was now the king of the monster realm and demon realm. She could call the wind and summon the rain in the 6 realms. She was having a good time. The only thing that made her unhappy was that she didn't seem to be growing any longer. Originally, she had grown slowly, but at least she had grown. However, ever since she ate the flower and turned into a 12 or 13-year-old girl, she stopped growing. She didn't notice this problem at first. When she did, it was already another 500 years later. She hadn't grown a single centimeter in the past 500 years. What appeared in the mirror had always been that sweet little Loli. At first, she thought that the environment in the Devil world was not good, so she returned to the demon world. She lived in the demon world for another 500 years, but the reality still made her despair. She began to look everywhere for a way to grow up. She used all kinds of strange methods, but there was still no effect. One of her senior subordinates, a former Devil King, heard a special prescription from somewhere. He said that the Devil Lord's growth might be related to the imbalance of yin and yang. Chapter 1784. The Demon King also said that as long as she married someone, she might be able to break the curse of not being able to grow up. Other than the Devil Lord, this Demon King was one of the strongest in both the Demon Realm and the Demon Realm in terms of martial arts and fame. He said that because he wanted the Demon Lord to marry him. He also hinted to the Demon Lord that she should marry the strongest cultivator. The stronger the cultivator, the easier it would be for her to grow up. What he didn't expect was that although the demon lord believed his prescription, she didn't want to marry him. She was thinking about the man who helped her, but that man never appeared in her life again. She couldn't find him at all. So she turned her attention to the strongest cultivator in the 6 realms. At that time, she was already very famous in the 6 realms. Even the celestial realm didn't dare to offend her. At that time, it was rumored that the most powerful cultivator in the 6 realms was the supreme god of the 36 layers of heaven. She thought that the supreme god might be good, but she didn't know if he was old or ugly because the supreme god almost never appeared in the world. Even when he occasionally appeared in the 6 realms, he always wore a white jade mask. No one knew if the person behind the mask was ugly or not. Until one time, when she went to a flower appreciation party in the celestial realm, she happened to see the supreme god walking out of a door accompanied by the celestial emperor. At that moment, she felt like she was struck by lightning. At that moment, she was overjoyed. Although he was wearing a mask, although the powerful divine aura around him caused everyone present to lower their heads and not dare to breathe, she still recognized him. Jolie. So he was the supreme god. She was the demon lord. Since she came to the celestial palace, the celestial emperor had to give her face. Therefore, the celestial emperor walked to her and bowed to greet her. Her eyes fell on the supreme god standing not far away. The supreme divinity was also looking at her. She couldn't see his expression under the mask, only his deep blue eyes that were as deep as a lake. When he looked at her, his eyes were calm. She couldn't tell if he recognized her or not. Shuima was no longer the ignorant child who was born more than 2,000 years ago. Although she was still fierce, she wasn't reckless. She curled her eyelashes and greeted him, "Divine Lord, long time no see." The supreme divinity nodded faintly at her, then turned and left. She was still a little disappointed. To be honest, she still missed his embrace, but he didn't seem to recognize her anymore. It didn't matter. It would be the same even if she made him get to know her again. Therefore, she sent someone to propose to the Fanteon Palace of the 36th heaven. These things were all jumping scenes in Mo's dreams. In her dream, she knew that this was her past life, the past life that belonged to the Devil Lord Mo. Therefore, she stood in the void obediently as a spectator and concluded from time to time. In fact, she had always wanted to know what happened to her 50,000 years ago. She didn't expect that she would be able to dream about it on the first day she came to Fanteon Palace. Although these dreams were a little messy, and sometimes they were even scattered all over the place, it was a good thing that she had a strong mind that was good at summarizing. She was actually able to organize these fragmented dreams in an orderly manner. The last dream was exceptionally clear. Jolie was playing chess alone on a cliff when she suddenly appeared in front of his chessboard. "Divine Lord, have you made up your mind?" He didn't even raise his head. "Consider what?" Chapter 1785. "You didn't receive my marriage proposal." She raised her eyebrows and sat down across from him. "I did. It's not bad to use as a piece of paper," he answered casually. "You." She looked like she was about to get angry, but then she smiled and said, "It's okay. A gentleman is like jade, and a beauty is easy to find. It's okay if you're a little reserved. I won't give up." She sounded like a playboy who was flirting with a good girl in public. She was full of the spirit of an indomitable spirit to marry a beauty. "Pa." He put the chess piece in his hand on the chessboard and looked up at her, who was a head shorter than him. "You're quite brave." She picked up a black chess piece. She was small but high-spirited. "I've always been brave. There's nothing I can't get when I want to do something." Shinjoli looked indifferent. "Am I the thing you want?" She spun the chess piece on her fingertips and smiled like a blooming flower. It's a slip of the tongue. You're the person I want. Why don't you consider my condition carefully? I'm very good looking, and I'm good at martial arts. I'm also a good match for you. Why are you dissatisfied with me? Why do you have to choose me? Shinjuli put down a white chess piece. You're the strongest man in the world. When I, the Devil Lord, choose a son-in-law, I naturally have to find someone of equal social status who is worthy of me. She answered confidently. She didn't know why her words angered him. His face turned cold. I'm not interested in you. You can leave. Hey, what do you want to do to make you agree? Give me a straight answer. She was a little impatient. He no longer paid any attention to her and continued to play chess. A crimson light flashed, and she slashed her sword at him on the chessboard. He lowered his head and seemed to have eyes. He waved his sleeve and wrapped it around her sword. He waved it again and she took a few steps back. He didn't say anything. He packed up the chessboard and turned to leave. She didn't give up and jumped in front of him to stop him. What's wrong with me? She was in such a hurry to stop him that she almost fell into his arms. She hurriedly took a few steps back. She realized that she was too short and needed to look up at him. Suddenly, she felt that she wasn't imposing enough. She jumped onto a rock next to her and barely reached the same height as him so that she could look into his eyes. Shinjuli didn't say anything. He just looked at the big rock under her feet and then looked at her again. The corner of his mouth slightly hooked up. Although he didn't say anything, the meaning was obvious. He seemed to dislike her for being short. Her small face blushed slightly, but she still raised her head to look at him. Although I am a little short, as long as we get married, I will grow up. Shinjuli had wanted to leave, but he stopped when he heard her words. Can you grow up after getting married? Who told you that? You're in a hurry to get married because of this rumor. His tone was really not good. She seemed to feel that she had let it slip, so she rubbed her eyebrows in annoyance. You don't have to care who told me that. Just tell me, do you agree or not? If you agree, I won't let you suffer too much. I'll bring a large dowry. I heard that you are looking for the Mirage Pearl to make chess pieces. I have collected a set. If you agree to be my husband, I can give it to you as a betrothal gift. No, as a dowry. I don't need to live in your Fanteon palace. We only need to sleep together once a month. You can do whatever you want at other times. You can even take concubines. Chapter 1786. She gave him her conditions, which were unprecedentedly generous. She was the type who understood the principles of the world. The more Shinjuli listened, the angrier he became. When she was done, she waited for him to give her an opinion. Shinjuli only said, "In your dreams." Then, he left without looking back. She chased after him, "Hey, Jiuli, why don't you give me any conditions? If you think we need to sleep together too many times after we get married, we can change it to once every 2 months. But we have to persist for a longer period of time, 6 years." He suddenly turned around and walked directly in front of her. She was caught off guard and fell into his arms. Her forehead hit his chest, which made her a little dizzy. When she was about to take another step back, her waist was suddenly hugged by him. The pleasant smell that she had been longing for filled her nose again, and her 2 arms automatically wrapped around his neck. This was an action that she had often done when she was a child, and this time, she was exceptionally proficient in it. He didn't push her away this time. Instead, he raised his hand and lifted her chin. His breath was dangerous. He was very close to her. "Do you know what sleeping together is?" She blinked and looked at him, doesn't sleeping together mean a man and a woman sleeping together? You see, my body is so small, I can't take up many beds. Also, I only sleep one night every 2 months. Even if you're not used to it, you won't be tired. You won't lose out if you become my husband. She didn't know why, but she felt that his breath was a little dangerous this time. It made her heart beat inexplicably. When Shinjioli heard her words, his expression was not as cold as before. He looked at her in his arms. Although she had grown up a lot, she still looked like a child. Although she had become the devil master, she was still very naive in some aspects. He had no intention of marrying anyone, including her. Moreover, the reason she gave was so ridiculous. He put her down and took a step back. He said indifferently, I won't marry you. Don't waste your energy. He turned around and left. She proposed so sincerely but was still rejected by him. Shuima's stubborn temper rose. She shouted behind him, Shinjioli, I won't give up on you. If I say I want it, then you must get it. This man was too stingy. She was only going to sleep with him once every 2 months, and she had even given him such generous conditions. Yet, he kept rejecting her. She wasn't happy at all. The more he acted like this, the more she wanted to conquer him. Shinjioli did not look back. Naturally, he did not take her threat to heart. In the blink of an eye, he was far away. Ning Shuimo, who was watching all this in her dream, couldn't help but rub her eyebrows. Her EQ was so low in her previous life. To chase a man like Shinjioli using such a simple and crude method, it would be strange if she could catch up with him. In the void, she looked at herself standing there with her fists clenched. She couldn't help but want to go up and teach her a lesson. But as soon as she took a step forward, the scenery changed. The palace walls were made of green jade, and the lofty buildings within the gates were faintly discernible. The words Fantian Palace were faintly discernible above the gates. Shuima, who looked like a loli, was sitting in front of the palace gates. There were bouquets of fresh flowers in front of and behind her. She was lying on the white jade bed in the midst of the flowers. She supported her head with one hand and flipped through a book with the other. She looked quite comfortable. Obviously, she was preparing for a long battle here. She couldn't enter Fantian Palace, so she simply made a bed in front of the gate and waited for that person to appear. Chapter 1787. Fresh flowers couldn't be kept fresh, and the bouquets began to wither in less than a day. The petals fluttered around her body, creating a beautiful scene. She sneezed, rubbed her nose, and said to herself, it's been a month, and he's been cooped up in the palace all this time. Isn't he afraid that he'll grow hair? She felt a little itchy on her body, so she raised her hand to scratch it. Just as she scratched twice, she suddenly seemed to sense something. She looked up and saw Shinjioli flying over from a distance. In the blink of an eye, he landed in front of her Fantian Palace. She was stunned for a moment, then cursed in a low voice, damn spy. Obviously, her spy's information was wrong. Shinjioli wasn't in the palace, but had gone out a long time ago. As a result, she had been waiting here like a dumb goose for a month, changing flowers every day for a month. She heard that Shinjioli would always go out in the morning, so she would prepare a bouquet of flowers every morning. Now that it was already night, the flowers had already withered. But now that she finally met him, she didn't want to give up. So after being stunned for a moment, she picked up a bouquet of flowers and jumped in front of him, Shinjioli. She was short, and the bouquet was the largest. With such a hug, she was almost drowned in the bouquet, and no one could find her. In order to pursue Shinjioli, she had spent a lot of money and asked many demons for advice. But most of the demons' courtship was very direct. Basically, both sides would directly roll in the grass nest if they liked each other. If one side didn't like the other, then the other side would use force. If he won, he would directly carry the beauty home. If he lost, he would be beaten by the beauty and never dare to think about it again. These tricks were obviously useless against Shinjuli, so someone found some books for her in the human world. These books were really good stuff. There were many ways to pursue a beauty in them, and one of them was to send flowers. It was said that beauties liked flowers, and it was best to send a bouquet a day. Generally, sending flowers for 10 days to half a month would move the beauty and win her heart. She felt that this method was good, so she implemented it first. She was a devil master, so if she wanted to send flowers, she would naturally send the largest bouquet to show her sincerity. Therefore, every bouquet of flowers she made was so huge that it could drown her. She looked up at him through the gaps of the flowers, only to see him frowning slightly. He quietly bypassed her and raised his hand to open the enchantment of Fantion Palace. It wasn't easy for her to see him, so she naturally wasn't willing to be ignored. She turned around and handed the huge bouquet to him. "This is for you." Shinjuli's lips twitched. It had always been men who chased after women and gave them flowers. Why was it the other way around when it came to him? What did this little thing take him for? He raised his hand and pushed aside the huge bouquet in front of him. He said indifferently, "I don't care." The flowers were already a little withered, and when he plucked them, half of the petals fell off and landed on the face of the little girl behind the bouquet. Shuama brushed the petals off her face. She wasn't discouraged. According to the story, she had to do it at least a dozen times. She had just given him a serious gift, so it was expected that he wouldn't be moved. She showed a little face that was more energetic than the flowers and said heroically, "What kind of flowers do you like? I'll pick them for you. I don't care about any flowers, so you don't have to waste your time." Shinjuli bypassed her again. However, she pulled his sleeve. "Julie, haven't you always liked me? Why don't you agree?" Chapter 1788. Shinjuli stopped in his tracks and looked down at her little hand that was grabbing his sleeve. "Let go." His voice was extremely cold. If she was an ordinary immortal or devil, she might have let go of his hand after hearing his voice. However, Shuama would not. She was not scared. Her little hand held his sleeve even tighter. "Jolie, you gave me a reason. I feel that you like me. You even liked to hug me back then." Shinjuli looked down at her. "Does it mean that I like you because I like to hug you? Devil Master, are you thinking too much?" Just as he said this, his sleeve shook and a furry little head popped out. Its sharp little mouth almost touched Shuama's hand. Shuama was stunned for a moment and let go of her hand. She could see that it was a snow-white little fox with fluffy white fur. It was extremely beautiful. The little fox looked delicate and delicate. After it came out, it climbed onto Shinjuli's arm. Then, with a faint white flash, it turned into a pink little doll. The little doll looked like she was 3 or 4 years old. She had a delicate little face. Shinjuli raised his hand and hugged her. The little doll wrapped her arms around his neck. Then, she turned around and looked at Shuama with a pair of round eyes. Shuama was still holding the half-withered flower in her hand. She looked at the little doll in shock and was speechless. The little doll's posture in Shinjuli's arms was exactly the same as when she was young. They were both full of possessiveness. Shuama's heart suddenly hurt. Although she did not know why it hurt, she knew that it was very painful. She looked at the little doll and then looked at Shinjuli. Shinjuli looked indifferent. "I picked her up in the mountains. She's not bad, right? I have always liked small and soft children. I always want to hug her when I see her. The subtext was that he liked to hug her and educate her because of this reason. He treated her no differently than he treated the little fox doll. Shuama pursed her lips. She's not as pretty as I was when I was young. I was the prettiest when I was young. As soon as she said this, the little fox doll immediately bared its fangs at her, revealing a pair of small canines. Her teeth are not as pretty as my tiger teeth. Shuama immediately attacked the fox doll again. She didn't like to see him carrying other children. It felt like her belongings were being taken away by someone else. Shinjuli probably didn't expect that she would notice this. The corners of his eyes twitched, and he said indifferently, "Different flowers enter different eyes. I like her now." Shuama's self-esteem suffered another blow. She pursed her lips even tighter. She paused for a moment before discussing with him, "So you like girls this small?" "Actually, I can also become as small as her." She was afraid that he wouldn't believe her, so she simply turned around. As expected, her body shrank by half, and she became as small as 3 or 4 years old. Just like when he saw her before, she looked up at him with a pair of big round eyes. "Look, I'm still prettier than her." She was the cutest and most beautiful when she was young. When they walked in the mountains, even the fiercest gorillas wanted to hug her. It could be said that she was the killer of all creatures. Shinjuli looked at the little lowly demon master on the ground and felt the veins on his forehead throbbing. Before he could speak, Shuama spoke again. "I remember that you like me like this. You would hug me every time. After we get married, I can share a room with you like this, share a room with him like this." That scene was too wretched. Shinjuli refused to imagine it. Chapter 1789. Ning Shuama, who was hiding in the void as a bystander, had the urge to buy a piece of tofu and slap it to death in her previous life. At that time, she was so stupid that she was cute, but also so brave that she was cute. When one's martial arts were too strong, one's brain would often be too lazy to think. In her previous life, Shuama was born to be a strong martial artist. She would beat those who disobeyed her until they became obedient. No one could go against her. Therefore, it was not easy for her to see the dark side. She was also straightforward in her actions. For example, this time, she had set her sights on Shinjuli. She would chase him to the end. The method she used was so straightforward that one could not look at it directly. Ning Shuama could not help but blush. Her gaze fell on Shinjuli again. She could clearly understand that she was dreaming and remembered everything that happened before she fell asleep. She could no longer see him in reality. It was not bad to see him in her dream. Although he could not see her in her dream and would not communicate with her, she felt that it was a gift from the heavens to be able to see him again. Zhuang Xingxiao was a butterfly in a dream. Who could differentiate between the dream and the real world? The Almighty in the real world had completely left her. That reality was too cruel. She did not want to return to reality for the time being. She looked at the Almighty below. Although she knew that it was an illusion in her dream, she still looked at him greedily. She even flew down to his side and stretched out her arms to hug him. However, she hugged empty air. Her arms swept past his body. In the end, she could not have any physical contact with him. The little fox doll in Shinjuli's arms suddenly sneezed. She raised her small hand and rubbed her nose. "Itchy." Her voice was soft and tender. Shinjuli looked at the almost bald bouquet in front of him. After Shuama became smaller, she was not willing to throw away the bouquet. Now, she was completely covered by the flowers. "Your flowers made her uncomfortable," Shinjuli said coldly. "Ah." Little Shuama did not react. With a wave of his sleeve, the bouquet of flowers flew straight into the air and disappeared without a trace. It was unknown which trash space he had thrown it into. You! Little Shuema clenched her fists. It wasn't easy for her to get these flowers. Shinjuli no longer looked at her. He bypassed her and directly opened the enchantment of Fantion Palace. He didn't even look back at her. The palace gate slowly closed in front of Little Shuema. Little Shuema didn't follow him in. Without Shinjuli's permission, no one could enter his palace. Shuema had tried before, but failed every time. Little Shuema stared at the closed palace door with her eyes wide open. Her small fists clenched and unclenched, then clenched and unclenched. She looked like she would jump up and smash the door at any moment. After a while, she seemed to have thought of something. Her whole body was like a deflated balloon. She hung her head and returned to her bed in front of the door. She sat there and hugged her knees. After a while, she pursed her lips and muttered, "So I'm not the only child he raised. He didn't come to see me for a long time. He probably went to raise other children." Her voice was a little disappointed. She turned over and lay down on the white jade bed. However, she felt something. When she touched it, she found that it was a purple-red bottle. There was a medicinal liquid gently swaying in the bottle. Where did this come from? She turned the bottle over and over to examine it. The bottle seemed to be made of glass, and she could see her little face reflected on it. When she saw her little face, she was shocked. Chapter 1790. There seemed to be a layer of red bumps on her face. She couldn't believe it. She took out a mirror and looked at it. She saw a baby's face covered with red bumps. God! No wonder he looked at her strangely. She had bumps on her face. She was so ugly. Of course, she was not as good-looking as the little fox in his arms. She even boasted that she was pretty. Ning Xuemal looked at her little face in the void and knew that she was allergic to pollen. The small medicine bottle must have been thrown to her by Shinjuli. The pills inside should be anti-allergy medicine. However, Xuemal didn't know that at that time. She kept touching her little face and cast spells on it from time to time. Obviously, spells couldn't fool her. So, more and more bumps appeared on her little face. In the end, her hands, neck, and even her body were covered with bumps. She couldn't help but scratch, but the more she scratched, the more she scratched. This was probably the first time she had experienced such a situation. She was a little flustered and took out all the medicines she had on her. However, these medicines were all golden source salves, antidotes, or medicines to enhance magic power and physical strength. None of them were suitable for the illness. She fumbled around with the medicine bottles and accidentally knocked the medicine bottle that had once hit her, causing it to shatter with a loud bang. Xuema seemed to have just noticed the medicine bottle. When she turned around, she found that the medicine had spilled all over the floor. She couldn't put it away. She was so itchy that she couldn't help but change her body back to her appearance when she was 12 or 13 years old. She wanted to see if it would be lighter if she changed back to her original appearance. However, after she changed back to her original appearance, the itch got worse. It was the first time she knew that itch could be so deadly. She randomly swallowed a few antidotes and endured for a while. Suddenly, she jumped on the bed. It was itchy. It was so itchy. Now, her eyelids were covered with bumps. She didn't know where to scratch. So, she rolled around on the bed and scratched. She didn't know that her bed was also stained with that kind of pollen. As she rolled around, more and more pollen stained her body, and her allergy became more and more serious. Ning Xuema, who was hovering in the air, felt anxious for her for no reason. However, she couldn't say anything to remind her to quickly get away from that bed, perhaps because it was too itchy, tears seeped out from the corners of her eyes. Her body was also covered in bloody marks from her scratches. Her little mouth couldn't help but let out a rather painful groan. She was about to throw caution to the wind. She grabbed the medicine bottles next to her and poured all the medicine into her mouth. Someone suddenly grabbed her wrist. The medicine bottle in her hand was snatched away. She was so itchy that she almost lost her mind. She whimpered and began to struggle. She felt as if she had fallen into someone's embrace. Following that, her entire body felt cold, as if she had been thoroughly cleansed by some cold water. That coolness caused the itchiness to subside a little, and also brought her back to her senses a little. Just when she was about to open her eyes to take a look, her little mouth was pried open. A cold and slightly bitter medicine was poured into her mouth. She swallowed subconsciously. Her throat was so itchy that it almost broke. Now, when the medicine slid down her throat, she felt a cooling sensation, and the itchiness subsided. However, other parts of her body were still itchy. Even her eyeballs were itchy. She couldn't help but want to scratch them. Her hands were caught, and even her feet that were kicking and scratching her legs were restrained. She could no longer move. Chapter 1791. Bear with it, it will be over soon. She heard a cold voice. She could not bear it any longer. She was so itchy that she wanted to go crazy. His hands and feet were shackled, and he desperately struggled. Unconsciously, he used his magic power in an attempt to break free from the shackles. Her body was on fire for a while, and then countless knives appeared in the next moment. She used all kinds of methods to save herself. Her kung fu was not weak, and she used all kinds of moves when she was in a desperate state. It seemed that it caused a lot of trouble for the person who restrained her. In the end, the man suddenly pulled her into his arms and hugged her tightly. "Be good. Don't move." That embrace was warm and comforting, strangely calming her emotions that were about to explode. Her body stiffened, and she wanted to open her eyes to take a look. However, her eyelids were completely swollen. She could not even open her big eyes. Nevertheless, she was familiar with this embrace. Her chaotic mind seemed to have reacted a little. She opened her mouth. "Jolie." The hands holding her tightened slightly, and his breath was slightly heavy. "Bear with it, it won't itch anymore after a while." Subconsciously, she listened to him. Although she still felt unbearably itchy, she really endured it and did not move. Time ticked by. Because she had taken the right medicine, the itchiness on her body gradually disappeared, her tense muscles gradually relaxed, and her swollen eyes were finally able to see something. What entered her vision was a snow-white robe and the beautiful curve of the other party's Adam's apple. Everything was so familiar. She often saw this scene when he hugged her many years ago. Now that she saw it again, Shuima felt warm in her heart. She stared at his Adam's apple. She wanted to kiss it when she saw it, but now, she wanted to do it even more. She was a person of action. Once she thought of it, she would do it immediately. She suddenly raised her head, and her mouth touched his Adam's apple. Then, she rubbed it hard. Because she was still itching, she could not control her lips well, and saliva flowed out. She kissed his neck with her saliva. He suddenly froze and waved his arms. As a result, Shuima, who was lying comfortably in his embrace, was sent flying into the air. She reacted quickly. When her body was in the air, she flipped over and landed on the ground. "Jolie, you like me." She smiled. If it were not for her swollen eyelids, her eyes would have been sparkling. Shinjoli was speechless. He calmly cast a cleansing spell on himself to get rid of the saliva on his neck. Then, he calmly looked at the excited Shinjoli and said, "Devil Master, you are overthinking. I just don't want you to embarrass yourself in front of my palace." "You don't mean what you say." Shuima interrupted him. I heard that the supreme divinity is usually so cold-blooded that you wouldn't even care if someone died in front of you. Now, I only tickled you, and you couldn't bear it. She did her best to prove herself. In the void, Ning Xuemo, who had been watching everything from Xuemo's perspective, could not help but touch her forehead. Ning Xuemo could only comment on her courtship in her previous life. Her courage was praiseworthy, but her EQ was worrisome. Shinjuli's eyes finally fell on Xuemo. She could not tell if he was happy or angry. Devil Lord, have you always been so narcissistic? Chapter 1792. So ugly. She's so ugly. The little snow fox at his feet jumped up and down and spoke in human language. Xuemo did not say anything and shot out a ray of light. Smelly fox, shut up. You're the ugly one. You have fur all over your body. She moved too quickly and Shinjuli probably did not expect her to lower herself to the level of a little fox. He was unable to block it in time and the ray of light hit the little fox. The little fox screamed and rolled a few times on the ground. It stood up dizzily and sat down on the ground again. Several tufts of fur fell off its body one after another. Its originally smooth, satin-like fur was now bald here and there. It looked very ugly. The little fox cried out and threw itself at the Supreme God's feet. Supreme God, woo-woo, Xuemo was still proud. You're uglier than me right now. You're still too young to fight with me for a man. Bang. A loud sound interrupted Xuemo's words. Xuemo turned around and found that her jade couch had been smashed to pieces by Shinjuli. The booklets that were placed at the corner of the couch flew up and scattered in the air. A few pages fell in front of Shinjuli. His eyes were sharp and he saw a line of words, chasing a male pet at all costs. Chasing a male pet. She thought of him as a male pet. Shinjuli was such a calm person, but his face was faintly ashen at this moment. He waved his sleeve in disgust and the booklet scattered on the ground burned and turned into ashes. Shinjuli's voice was colder than the winter wind. Scram for this deity. With a wave of his sleeve, the broken pieces of the jade couch whizzed toward Xuemo's face. Along with the broken pieces, his ice-cold voice sounded, "If I see you pestering me here again, I will kill you." Scram! With Xuemo's martial arts, these fragments naturally could not hit her. She waved her sleeve and the fragments disappeared in the air. However, Shinjuli returned to the palace as soon as she was done talking to him. She was the only one left standing in front of the huge palace gates. Her body had a good foundation. After taking the right medicine, the allergic symptoms had almost disappeared, and her body was no longer itchy. She stared at the palace door in a daze, not understanding why he was suddenly so angry. Wasn't he treating her? He clearly cared about her, didn't he? Why must he reject her? She stood there for a moment, but she still couldn't figure it out. She wanted to sit down and think about it, so she casually condensed another bed. However, she didn't expect that the bed would automatically split into 4 halves as soon as it was placed on the bluestone floor. It seemed that Shinjuli had cast some kind of spell here to prevent her from setting up camp here. She pursed her lips and suddenly thought of something. She took out a mirror and looked at herself. She couldn't help but scream. Reflected in the mirror was a face covered in bloody scars. Streaks and streaks of blood were scattered all over the place. It was a ghastly sight. Needless to say, she had scratched herself when she couldn't bear the itch. She had spent so much on scratching herself, no wonder he looked at her with such disgust. Even she herself was shocked by his distressed expression. She pursed her lips and looked at herself in the mirror. Then, she raised her head and looked at the closed palace gate. Finally, she turned around and flew away. Ning Xuemo had always been looking at everything from the perspective of little Xuemo. Once she left, she naturally followed. However, at the moment when she left, she looked back at the palace gate. Chapter 1793. Shinjioli had adopted a little fox. Would this little fox be the fuse that would trigger the great war between the celestial beings and the devil race? Shuima would be reincarnated as Shuimo in the future. She would be reincarnated as a nine-tailed snow fox. Was it related to this? Mother, mother. There seemed to be a call from the distant sky, and there was a hint of panic in the voice. Little Nianma. Ning Shuima was shocked and immediately woke up. She opened her eyes and saw Shin Nianma's anxious little face. When he saw that she had opened her eyes, Shin Nianma burst into tears and directly rushed into her arms. Mother, you scared me to death. A somewhat gloomy and cold side chamber with a simple big bed. These were the scenes that she saw before she fell asleep. There was no little fox, and there was no Shinjioli. Everything that happened just now was just a dream from her previous life. Ning Shuima was a little stunned. She subconsciously held little Nianma in her arms tightly. Nianma, what happened? She just fell asleep. Why was the little guy so frightened? Mother, why did you come here to sleep? You didn't wake up just now. I thought mother. Shin Nianma's body trembled in her arms. Apparently, he was really frightened. His father was gone. If even his mother could not wake up from her sleep, little Nianma did not know who else he could rely on. Ning Shuima's eyes were slightly sore. She held the child in her arms tightly. Mother just fell asleep. It's okay. But mother didn't even breathe just now. I thought of many ways to wake you up, but I couldn't. Shin Nianma's voice was still a little choked. His voice was obviously hoarse. It seemed that little Nianma had used all kinds of methods to wake her up. He almost shouted until his voice was hoarse. Ning Shuima's eyes moved. There was no breath. Was it not a simple dream? She didn't know what was wrong with her, but she couldn't be bothered to think about it. Right now, she had to comfort her son. She was just about to hold her son in her arms to comfort him, but she didn't expect that the little fellow had already left her embrace on his own accord. He placed his small hand on her wrist to feel her pulse, closed his eyes, and carefully sensed for a moment. Then, as if he was relieved, he said, "Mother's pulse is normal now. It's not like before, when I couldn't feel her pulse." He couldn't wake her up. There was no heartbeat, no pulse. There was an 80% chance that his soul had left his body. To be able to have an out-of-body experience just by sleeping, he was indeed capable. Mother, there is a sense of evil in this room. Don't sleep here. Why don't you sleep in my father's chamber? Shin Nianma always felt that the side chamber was a little creepy. It's okay, baby. Ning Shuima naturally did not want to leave this place. Regardless of whether she was sleeping or having an out-of-body experience, as long as she could dream of her previous life and see him again, that was good enough. It turned out that he looked like this 50,000 years ago. This person had not changed much. Unlike herself, who had reincarnated 3 times and became 3 people, Shuima, Shuimo, and Ning Shuima. Among these 3 lives, Ning Shuima's life left the deepest impression on her. Little Nianma also came to this world because of Ning Shuima's life. Therefore, she still felt that Ning Shuima's short life was her real life. She also lived a passionate and unrestrained life. She didn't really understand Shuima's life, but in both Shuimo's and Ning Shuima's lives, she received Shinjioli's love. Chapter 1794. In her first life, Shinjioli actually liked her, didn't he? Otherwise, with Shinjioli's temperament, he wouldn't care even if she was itching to death in front of his palace, not to mention holding her in his arms to treat her. However, it was hard to say whether this liking was love or not. After all, in her previous life, Shuema was raised by him. It was more like he was raising a daughter. His feelings for her should be more like father-daughter love. The little girl that he raised suddenly vowed to marry him for a reason that made people speechless. Any man would not be able to accept it. Not to mention Shinjuli, who was an iceberg man who had not been moved for thousands of years. Therefore, it was normal for Shuema to kick an iron plate when she proposed to him. However, she didn't know what happened between the two of them that caused the outbreak of the great war of gods and demons, which caused the whole world to be reshuffled. When Ning Shuema first entered the side chamber, she wanted to make a nest for her to sleep in. She didn't look carefully at the other decorations in the side chamber. At this moment, when she sat up on the bed, she carefully sensed the atmosphere in the room. It was indeed not quite right. It felt a little cold. She walked around the room a few times and found a dusty box on a beam. Her heart skipped a beat and she took it down. The box was not big and looked very old. It was made of the kind of immortal Phoebe Janan wood. There was no lock on the box, only a hidden buckle. Ning Shuema looked around the box and could see that it had existed for a long time. Maybe it was an old item from 50,000 years ago. There should be a layer of psychokinesis on the outside, so even the black iron buckle on the box was shining. This thing should be Shinjuli's private collection. Should she open it? She hesitated for a moment and heard a sound. She looked down and saw that the box had popped open automatically, revealing the things inside. Ning Shuema was stunned. The things inside were a little messy. There were 2 bouquets of withered flowers, a huge ruby ring, a ruby brooch, and a red post at the bottom. Ning Shuema opened the red post and read it carefully. Her heart skipped a beat. There was a line of words written in flamboyant calligraphy: "We gods and devils love each other, and that is to eliminate evil for the people." Although the handwriting was not neat, it was very imposing. Ning Shuema seemed to see the heroic spirit of the demon lord, who was fearless in this world, when he wrote these 2 lines of words. This must be the proposal post. Unexpectedly, Shinjuli didn't use this post as a paper to ignite the fire. Instead, he carefully kept it. Her gaze fell on the flower, the ring, and the brooch. These things should have been given to him by her in her previous life, right? It was similar to his taste and style in his previous life. She sat there for a long time, lost in thought. Shin Nianma was also looking at the few things. He was young, but his taste was not bad. He was very much like his father, so his comments were very accurate. The surface of the ring is a little rough, and the pin of the brooch is too sharp. The ruby on it does not match. This handwriting doesn't look very cultured. It exudes a sharp edge and lacks meaning. Damn, this little thing criticized the things from her previous life as worthless. Ning Shuema knocked on Shin Nianma's head. What do you know? This handwriting looks very imposing. Shin Nianma pouted. Nianma's handwriting is better than this. Well, then I will test your homework later. Okay. Shin Nianma's eyes sparkled. The 2 of them talked for a while and finally dispersed the gloomy atmosphere in the hall. Chapter 1795. Mother, is father really in isolation? Shin Nianma finally asked the question that he had always wanted to ask. Yes. Her forced laughter was like a balloon. Her son's casual words were like a needle to her. Even a slight prick could cause her to break into pieces. The pain seemed to spread at any time and was about to drown her. She struggled to smile and got up. Let's go, Nianma. Let me see how your homework is. Missing someone was like a weed. With a little stimulation, it would spread like a disaster. It made people want to get drunk to relieve their worries. They also wanted to sleep to numb themselves and coax themselves. However, Ning Xuema could not do these things because she still had a son. She did not have the capital to indulge her sadness. All the pain was suppressed in her heart. She tried to make herself busy and numb herself with being busy. However, when she was free, she would be lost in her thoughts for a long time. At this moment, she was looking at the books on the bookshelf. Almost all the books were written by Shinjuli himself. She casually opened a book and saw his concise and free handwriting. There were old and new books. The new ones were obviously prepared for Shin Yinma because the content was completely based on his physical characteristics. As for the old books, they were neatly placed. There were Buddhist scriptures, poison scriptures, medical scriptures. There were all kinds of books. A person who had lived for too long and had too much kung fu could not help but feel a little bored. Therefore, Shinjuli learned a variety of things. His interests often changed. When he reached the peak of a skill, he would write a summary and throw it aside. These books were his summary. Shin Yinma was reciting the books, so Ning Xuema sat there and read casually. With her current state of mind, she could not read anything. However, it was good to be able to read his handwriting here. She remembered that when she was watching You from the Star, after the male lead left, the female lead missed him very much. She desperately tried to find those who knew the male lead and asked them to talk about the male lead. She listened to it over and over again and cried over and over again. At that time, she was puzzled. Since he was gone, what was the use of listening to those trivial things? Now, she finally understood that feeling. In fact, she also wanted to hear more about Shinjuli from other people. Just like earlier, she tried to tease Shin Yinma by telling him about the things that happened between him and her father. Listening to it once wasn't enough, he wanted to listen to it a second time. Even though it was not a funny thing, she could still laugh out loud. She laughed so hard that tears almost flowed out. It was as if she was suffering from hysteria. Until Shinjuli was almost suspicious, she forced herself to stop. She pretended that nothing had happened and sat by the bookshelf to read the books written by Shinjuli. The sun was shining brightly outside, and the bright rays of light shone into the room, casting silhouettes on the people inside. It was such a beautiful afternoon, and the sun was so bright. If he was still here, his heart felt like it was being torn apart. She clenched the book in her hand and bent down slightly, waiting for the pain to pass. Inadvertently, he caught a glimpse of a book in the corner of the bookcase. It looked a little special, as if it was often taken down to read. What kind of book was it that Shinjuli often took down to read? She curiously walked over and raised her hand to take the book. However, she felt that something was not right. It was not a book, but a mechanism. After all, she used to be a secret agent, so she was very familiar with the mechanism. She held the book and turned it slightly. Suddenly, the bookshelf slowly moved to both sides, revealing a passage. Chapter 1796. She was stunned for a moment. Shinjuli actually made a secret room in his study room. What was this secret room for? When Shinjuli was still alive, all his important things were kept in his storage space. No matter how confidential the documents or things were, he only needed to throw them into his storage space. No one could find them, and he did not have to worry about losing them or being found out. Now, he suddenly made such a secret room. Obviously, he had a premonition that he would immortalize. There were some things that he did not want to let people see, but he was reluctant to destroy. Therefore, the existence of this secret room was born. So, what was it that he was reluctant to destroy? Her heart was beating fast. She had a vague feeling that the things inside might be related to her. She looked back at Shin Yinma, but he was reading. He was focused on nothing and did not even look in her direction. She paused for a moment and walked in by herself. The passage was not long. After turning a corner, there was a door in front of her. Ning Xuema's face was slightly pale. She recognized this door. It was the door of the side hall where she lived on Tianyin Peak. When she entered the Devil Kingdom, Shinjiuli ordered to expel her from his own house. He also ordered the demolition of the side hall where she lived. She did not expect that the door of the side hall would appear here. She reached out and slowly pushed the door open. Then, she stood at the door and held her breath. It was a bridal room. No, it was a bridal room. The bed was red with morning glow, the table and chairs were red, and the quilt was red with the word, she. The whole room was a warm red. It was a festive red. Even the luminous pearl hanging above her head was pink. Obviously, this was the bridal room of a newlywed. It was a very luxurious bridal room. The style of the bridal room was the style that she used to like. Even the layout was faintly familiar. Ning Xuema felt a little weak in her legs. She slowly walked in. Her hands fell on the red bed, and her eyes fell on the quilt. Even if these things were burned to ashes, she would still recognize them. This was the only time when he and she were intimate, and he casually arranged it. At that time, she thought that those things were just illusions that he casually made. She did not expect that these things were real, and now they were here. The past was like smoke, floating in her heart. That time, she had said in a fit of pique that she wanted to consummate her marriage with someone else. In the end, his wolf nature had been driven out. He had casually arranged a bridal chamber and carried her in. That was the first and only time he had made love with her. At that time, she was lying on the bed with him. She tried to push him away but ended up with him. That was how Nianmo was born. However, after that intimacy, she woke up in the side hall of the Heavenly Sound Peak. Everything at that time, including him, had disappeared without a trace. She waited bitterly for him for 10 days, only to be met with a series of nightmares. This memory was both beautiful and cruel to her. Because just a moment ago, he had brought her to heaven, and not long after, he had personally sent her to hell. She thought that the wedding room was just a bubble, but it turned out that the things inside were real. It seemed that he had already prepared it in the storage space. He had actually prepared this in his storage space. Perhaps he really had the intention of marrying her back then and wanted to give her a surprise. Shinjiuli was no longer there. Ning Xuema could no longer ask what his thoughts were at that time. She just held the quilt and stood in front of the bed for a moment. She got on the bed and shook the quilt. Her heart was suffocating as if she was drowning. Chapter 1797. She just held the gauze curtain in a daze. After standing in front of the bed for a moment, she got on the bed and shook off the quilt. Her heart felt as if it was drowning. There were 2 wooden figures in the quilt, a man and a woman. Their facial features, figures, and clothes were all vivid and lifelike. It was exactly her and his appearance. The carving could only be described as a work of art. The woman's face was smiling, and there was a shallow dimple on both cheeks. Her small mouth was slightly pursed, and her eyes were curved into crescents. Her long eyelashes were curled up, lifelike. It was not just lifelike. Her expression and movements, from the big body to the small eyelashes, there was not a single flaw. It was simply a miniature version of Ning Xuema. It was as if this wooden carving could come to life with just a breath of air. The man's appearance was Shinjiuli, but the clothes on his body had changed. It was no longer his usual white clothes. Instead, it was red like the woman's. The style of the red robe was not that of an ordinary bridegroom. It was his usual style of dressing. There were flowing patterns on the red robe, faintly in the shape of twin lotus flowers. This should be the wedding dress he designed for himself, right? The lines were smooth. It was obviously a wooden carving, but it gave people a feeling of the clothes being blown by the wind. The two wooden carvings were lying side by side. The man's hand was holding the woman's hand. In the bridal room, the pair of wooden carvings in the red wedding dress were lying side by side in the wedding quilt. Ning Xuema only felt that her eyes were hot, and her nose was also sour. There was no need to ask. These two wooden carvings were the work of Shinjiuli. Only by carving a person into the heart and bone marrow could one carve such an image without having to look at the person. It turned out that Ning Xuema still had some doubts about Shinjiuli. There were too many misunderstandings between them. Although she had asked him about those things at the last moment, and he had answered her, she had chosen to believe him. However, there was always a layer of gauze in the depths of her heart. Now, those remaining dust-like doubts had finally completely disappeared. He loved her. He had always loved her. He loved her to the bone. He loved her to the point of no return. That was why he suffered so much. He actually wanted to marry her, didn't he? Actually, he really wanted to hold her hand and enter the bridal chamber, right? In Shui Yimo's life, although he had also married her, that wedding was more like a joke. He knew that she came here with ulterior motives and forced him to marry her for an unspeakable purpose. She did not marry him willingly. And he was just going with the flow. That wedding was extremely simple. It was just a ceremony, and he didn't even wear a groom's robe. In Ning Xuema's current life, he and she were truly in love and even had a child together. However, due to some mishap, he didn't even give her a formal engagement. They owed each other a real wedding, a wedding where they held hands. When he set up all of this, he must have known that they would never have the chance to fulfill their marriage agreement, so he set this up here. A bridal chamber that she truly liked. He finally put on a real wedding robe and entered the bridal chamber hand in hand with her. What was his mood when he set up all this? What was his mood when he was sculpting the newlyweds? Ning Xuema didn't dare to think about it. She also didn't want to think too deeply. She tightly held the two wooden carvings, her fingertips turning white. Shinjiuli, I don't want this illusion. Shinjiuli, I want you to hold my hand and marry me with your own hands. Chapter 1798. Shinjiuli, since you love me so much, why didn't you let me die with you in the land of purple evil? Why did you have to bear everything alone? If you love me so much, how could you bear to leave me and Nianma alone in this world? Shinjiuli, we have agreed on 1,000 years. After 1,000 years, you have to come back. I will wait for you to come back and marry me. I will wait for you. You can't break your promise anymore. You said that a promise is worth a lot of money. You have never broken your promise to others. What about me? What about me, who loves you so much? I won't break my promise, right? So, you have to come back. No matter what you do, you have to come back. If you break this promise, I will look for you. I will look for you at all costs. Ning Xuema sat on the bed. Her heart seemed to be blocked by a cotton ball. It was painful and swollen at the same time. She almost could not breathe. Bursts of hot water rushed to her eyes. Tears seemed to come again, but she held them back. Don't cry. Ning Xuema, don't cry. If you want to cry, you have to wait for him to come back. You have to cry in front of him. Don't cry now. She stood up and walked around the room again. She found many old things that she had used before. They were all placed in the side hall of Tianyin Peak. She thought that these things were gone, but it turned out that they were all kept in his storage space and were now placed here. Her gaze fell on a wardrobe in the corner of the room. It was also the wardrobe that she used to use. Could it be the old clothes that she used to wear? She walked over and opened it. Then, she stared at the clothes in a daze. There were indeed a few pieces of her old clothes, but more of them were new clothes. There were all kinds of rare materials. Many of them were not even from the Tianxi continent or the celestial devil continent. She picked up a random piece and measured it on her body. It was exactly her size. She would find it too fat if she added a little more, and she would find it too skinny if she lost a little more. It seemed that these clothes were bought for her when he was traveling in the 6 realms. However, he could not give them away. She still remembered that he once told her that during the 10 years when she was missing, he had repeatedly traveled through different spaces and subconsciously tried to find her. Needless to say, these clothes were obtained by him at that time. No wonder her clothes were torn after she was injured in the Purple Evil Land, but he could easily take out a new set for her to change into. It seemed that he was prepared. How much did one have to love someone to be able to buy new clothes for her in a hopeless situation? What was his mood when he bought these clothes? She caressed the fabric and closed her eyes slightly. Shinjioli, I like all the clothes you bought. I think they will look good on me. I want you to come back and wear them for me to show you, so you built the secret room to store these things. You knew that you were nearing the end of your life, so you began to treat me coldly. You thought that as long as I didn't recover my memories, I wouldn't care even if you died, right? You didn't expect that I would recover my memory in Zishaw's place, so you deliberately said those harsh words to make me continue to despair about you. It was only when I was injured that you finally couldn't control your emotions and treated me well. That's why all your actions were so abnormal, wasn't it? You and I loved each other so much, but there were very few times when we were really happy. There were also very few times when we were really honest with each other. All your contradictory actions were just because you didn't want me to be sad for you. You even wanted to seal my memory again and let me forget you completely. Chapter 1799. You probably thought that by sealing my memory, I would not live in your Fantion palace, and the secret of your secret chamber would never be discovered by me. However, Shinjioli, if I really forget you, won't you be sad? Shinjioli, when you die, do you really not want me to be with you? She gripped the male wooden sculpture tightly and pressed her lips against the wooden sculpture's lips. She closed her eyes slightly and suppressed the sweet and fishy feeling in her chest. The room was full of his scent. Obviously, after he sent Ninma away, he spent the rest of his life here. It was a person's wedding hall, a person's thoughts, and a person's determination. Ning Xuema wandered around the room, pacing back and forth. She found a thick stack of paintings. Every painting was of her. She was smiling, crying, angry, shy. All kinds of postures, all kinds of expressions, every painting was vivid and lifelike, and the characters in every painting seemed to be able to walk out of it. She looked at the paintings one by one, unaware of the passage of time and the passage of time. When her heart ached to the extreme, she felt numb. Her fingers carefully touched the paintings as if she was copying the posture of the person when he was painting. It was as if the person was still standing in front of the table and painting. Xuemo. She seemed to hear a soft sigh in her ear. The voice was so familiar. She stiffly turned around and seemed to vaguely see him standing by the bed. He was wearing his usual wide white robe and his face was as cold as before. His pair of deep blue eyes were staring at her, his gaze deep and serene. She was stiff in the same place. Her lips trembled for a moment before she called out, "Great Master, was it an illusion? It must be an illusion." She wanted to rush over and throw herself into his arms, but she did not dare to. She could only walk over step by step and reach out with her trembling hands. Sure enough, the person in front of her disappeared. Only a sigh could be heard. Xuemo, take care, it was indeed an illusion. She slowly sat down by the bed and only felt that all the strength in her body had been drained. She sat there and did not want to move. When she was so sad, she could not cry. She didn't know how long she had been sitting there, lost in thought. Suddenly, she seemed to have sensed something. She looked up and saw Shen Nianmao standing at the entrance. She did not know how long he had been standing there, but his face was slightly pale. Ning Xuemao's heart sank. She quickly stood up and called out, "Nianmao." Shen Nianmao's big eyes slowly turned and finally fell on Ning Xuemao's face. He opened his mouth and asked, "Mother, father will never come back, right?" He was a sensitive child. In fact, he had this suspicion long ago, but he didn't dare to think about it or verify it. Although he asked, he still hoped to get a negative answer from his mother. He missed his father. He couldn't imagine what would happen if his father never came back. His eyes were wide open, and there was a trace of vulnerability and fear in his eyes. Ning Xuemao's heart skipped a beat. She took a deep breath and walked over. "Don't think too much. Your father will come back. It will take some time. Nianmao, you have to be patient." She raised her hand and wanted to carry the child, but little Nianmao turned and ran away. "I have to go to school. Father has left a lot of books for Nianmao. Perhaps he will come back after Nianmao has finished reading all the books." Ning Xuemao's outstretched hand stopped in midair. She could only stare blankly as her child ran away. Her heart was in extreme pain. Chapter 1800. She closed her eyes slightly and suddenly understood why Shinjiuli wanted to erase her memory at the last moment. This kind of pain was the most unbearable. This kind of lovesickness was the most painful. This kind of pain was endless. He wanted to erase her memory because he did not want her to suffer anymore. He did not want her to experience this kind of pain. However, no matter how painful it was, it belonged to her. She had escaped once, and she did not want to escape a second time. She would rather be sober and let the lovesickness gnaw at her heart than live in a muddled state. "Shinjiuli, if you don't want us to suffer anymore, come back." Ning Xuemao had always been a person who did not like to wait passively. Shinjiuli's death had many mysteries that could not be solved. For example, he did not give up on her before. After he regained his identity and returned to the Fantian Palace, he suddenly gave up. For example, he had never been able to predict his own fate. This time, it seemed that he had already predicted it. All the arrangements were extraordinarily comprehensive. For example, he should have recovered his memory from 50,000 years ago in the Fantian Palace. Could his death this time be related to the things that happened 50,000 years ago? For example, the flowers that he gave her were certainly not purely for the sake of pursuing her. Perhaps, there were many hidden reasons. For example, in the sealed place, Shinjiuli knew that she had recovered her memory. He knew that she still had feelings for him. He should know that if he died, how sad she would be, and how sad Nianmao would be. He did not want her and Nianmao to be sad. If it was not a last resort, he would not choose this path. What was his last resort? If it was only to seal Zisha, he could have told her all the important things. With her current kung fu, it was not impossible for them to work together. Perhaps both of them did not have to die to seal Zisha properly. Therefore, there should be other reasons. There must be a reason why he had to die. What she needed to do now was to find out the reason. Then, she would find a way to make him come back. During the night, Ning Xuemao was worried that the child would be lonely, so she wanted to sleep with him. However, little Nianmao shook his head vigorously. "Father said that I am a man, and a man should be responsible and independent early so that I can take care of my mother and the people I care about. Therefore, I want to sleep by myself. If father sees that I am so obedient, perhaps he will come back earlier. He was so sensible that it made one's heart ache. Ning Xuema was speechless. Shinjiuli did a good job in educating the child. He had really made all the arrangements for the child's funeral. She walked towards the side hall, but Shin Yanma stopped her and looked at her eagerly. Mother, can you stay in father's chamber? He has always missed you. If he knew that you were willing to stay in his palace, he might have come back earlier. Ning Xuema felt sad, but she forced a smile. Okay, I will listen to Nyanma. She finally entered his bedroom and slept on his bed. The blanket was filled with his scent, and she felt as if he was hugging her as she laid on it. Her heart meridians had almost recovered, and after resting for another night, she would go to Mother Earth to ask about the origin and use of those flowers. She thought that she would have a dream again, a dream about her previous life, a dream about the Devil Master Xuema. She didn't expect that after she slept, she didn't even have half a dream. She slept until dawn. Perhaps it was because she was sleeping on his bed, she felt a cold wind blowing when she was half awake. She seemed to see him sitting beside her and looking down at her. Chapter 1801. Perhaps it was because she was sleeping on his bed, but she felt a gust of cold wind when she was half awake. She seemed to see him sitting next to her and looking down at her. However, when she subconsciously opened her eyes to look again, the hall was empty. There was no one in sight. Everything was just a hallucination created when she smelled his scent. The first thing she did when she woke up was to see her son. When she came to his bedroom, she found that the little one was not there. Her heart skipped a beat, and she walked to the study room. Before she entered, she heard the sound of reading. The little guy's voice was still very childish, but his pronunciation was clear. He was reading very seriously. The mythical beast, Baizé, was guarding outside the door. It was very touched and praised the little master to Ning Xuema. The little master woke up in the middle of the night to study. He is so hard-working. If the Divine Lord knew, he would be very happy. Ning Xuema inwardly took a deep breath and suppressed the sudden throbbing pain in her heart. She slightly nodded her head. In fact, she did not advocate such education for children. However, now Nyanma wanted to study as soon as possible so that his father could come back. This was the little guy's only hope. He was working hard in his own way. Naturally, she would not disappoint the child. She gave Baizé a few words of advice and personally went to the kitchen to check the food that Nyanma was going to eat. She had to admit that the flying serpent was very talented in cooking. Every dish looked, smelled, and tasted good. It was as good as Shinjuli's cooking. She looked at her own hands. They were also a pair of dexterous hands. However, she was not good at cooking. She closed her eyes slightly. When she went back, she would also practice her cooking skills. At least, she could let her son eat the delicious food that she cooked. When he came back, she could also show her cooking skills in front of him to shock him. This idea encouraged her. People always had to have a belief and hope to survive. Even if they knew that the hope and belief were illusory, they would still choose to believe. Otherwise, how was she going to survive this 1,000 years of time? She first accompanied her son to eat breakfast and told him to study hard in the palace. If he was tired, he could go play with Baizé and Ting Shi and the rest. Don't be too tired. Shin Yanma leaned on her arm and counted his fingers to tell her his plans, including when to study, when to practice, when to eat, and when to absorb the essence of the sun and the moon. Ning Xuema calculated his plan. Combining work and rest, it wouldn't be too tiring, and it wouldn't be too tiring. Not a single second would be wasted. Almost all the time would be used perfectly. This learning plan was perfect. This little guy has a pretty good head on his shoulders. He had already learned how to plan things at such a young age. Ning Xuema praised him and told him that she was going out and would be back in about 3 days. She asked him not to worry. Now, Shen Yanma was like a frightened bird. He was afraid that he would lose either of his parents. Shen Jiuli's departure had frightened the child. He was trying his best to be sensible in exchange for his father's return. Although he did not say anything, she could see the vulnerability and uncertainty in the child's eyes. If she left without saying goodbye, she was afraid that the little fellow would let his imagination run wild again, and it wouldn't be good if he fell sick again. Little Nianma was very sensible. He did not ask Ning Xuema what she was going to do. He only hugged her neck and whispered, "Mother, come back soon. I will be good." She rubbed her son's head and kissed his pink cheeks. "Don't worry. I will come back on time." Chapter 1802. Ning Xuema actually didn't want to leave her son alone in the palace. If possible, she would rather bring him along. However, she couldn't go out this time. Mother Earth lived in the depths of the Earth's core, and there were many dangers along the way. She had to use extremely profound earth tunneling techniques and other spells to reach there. It was very unsafe to bring her son along. Now, she didn't want her son to take any risks. He was her only support now, and she couldn't allow any accidents. Mount Jai in the human world. The mountain was high and steep, and the trees were taller than the trees in the forest. The sky was very high, the clouds were very light, and the wind was very light. Nothing had changed, as if the purple fiend hadn't exploded. Who knew how many species had lost their lives in that catastrophe? The animals that were infected by the purple fiend were obviously destroyed by the explosion of the mountain, and the ones that were roaming around now were no longer the same as before. Ning Xuema stood at the foot of the mountain and looked at the peak not far away. That was where the eye of the formation used to be, and Shen Jiuli had never come back up after entering that place. 7 days. According to the saying of the human world, today was the 7th day of his death. Ning Xuema's gaze stared at the peak for a long time. It was as if looking at the peak would transform into the person she longed for. She didn't bring wine, but tea. When he was alive, he loved to drink tea, all kinds of tea. When she was his disciple and followed him to gain experience, she also drank quite a lot of good tea from him. She knew his taste, so this time, she brought the tea that he used to like to drink the most. She sat there cross-legged and personally brewed the kung fu tea for him. She went through the procedures one after another, and she was meticulous. When the first pot of tea was finally brewed, she slowly raised the cup towards the peak. "Great God, do you want to drink a few sips?" The mountain wind blew, and naturally, no one answered her. The corner of her lips moved slightly. "This is your favorite cloud tea. You once advised me to drink more of this tea, saying that it's good for my constitution. How about we drink it together?" She poured a cup of tea onto the ground, and the fragrance of the tea spread everywhere. Then, he slowly drank the cup in front of him. She toasted him 3 times before putting the cup down. Gently, she said, "Great Master, we have agreed on 1,000 years. You can't lie to me. Of course, you can come back earlier. The earlier, the better. Nianma misses you very much. He is very sensible. He has been studying hard and practicing so that you can come back earlier." She spoke softly to Gao Feng, as if he was sitting opposite her and drinking with her. She lowered her eyes and smiled to herself. "Guru, that day you asked me to wait for you for 10 days. In the end, I waited for you for 10 years. Do you know? Those 10 years were very difficult for me. I didn't know if you were alive or dead, and I was worried sick every day. But compared to now, I'd rather not have it that hard. At that time, I had at least half a chance. But now... Almighty, you went back on your words that time, but luckily you came back. You won't go back on your word this time, right? If you go back on your words again, if you go back on your words again. She muttered "I" for a long time but couldn't think of anything to threaten him with. Forget him. It seemed that the last thing he did was to erase her memory and make her forget him, so this threat was exactly what he wanted. Would she follow him? He probably knew that she couldn't abandon little Nienmo now. She couldn't die now. She closed her eyes slightly and sighed softly. Shinjioli, I really can't threaten you, but if you don't come back, I will be very sad. My heart disease may relapse. You don't want me to be in so much pain, right? Then come back. Chapter 1803. Her voice sounded like she was laughing and crying at the same time, echoing in the forest. Suddenly, there was a soft sound behind her. She quickly turned around and saw a person coming out from behind the tree. His red robe was slightly dirty, and his handsome face was slightly dispirited. He stood there with a wine pot in his hand and looked at her in a daze. It was Shuailan. His appearance was rarely sloppy, as if he had not taken a bath or taken care of himself for a few days. His whole body seemed to have been soaked in a vat of wine, and the smell of alcohol was overwhelming. Momo, I knew you would come today. This was the first sentence he said. The second sentence was, do you want to have a drink? His gaze turned to the highest peak in the distance. I know he does not like to drink, but since it is a sacrifice, of course, it should be done with wine. A few cups of weak tea would not seem solemn. Ning Xuema's feelings toward Shuailan were quite complicated. He used to be her closest companion and used to be her guard. He had gone through life and death with her countless times. He had hurt her, but he had also helped her. In fact, he had helped her more than he had hurt her. She looked at him from head to toe and frowned slightly. You have not returned to the Demon Kingdom. Shuailan was obviously a little drunk, but his mind was still quite clear. I have returned. I looked at the flower, and it has withered. His words were too jumpy, and Ning Xuemo finally understood what he was talking about. It seemed that Shuailan had previously invited her to the Demon Kingdom to see a kind of flower that did not bloom on time. She did not go because of little Nienmo's arrival. She did not expect that he still remembered this. Shuailan, you should go back to the Demon Kingdom. The Demon Kingdom cannot be without a leader. Otherwise, the group of little demons would rebel again. Shuailan stared at her. You are not in the Devil Kingdom. How do you know that the Devil Kingdom does not need you? Ning Xuemo was speechless. Shuailan's words were too harsh. She did not want to talk to him anymore, so she nodded at him. Up to you. She wanted to find Mother Earth and didn't want to delay any longer. Momo. Shuailan was drunk after all, so he was a little unsteady on his feet. He tripped over a big rock under his feet and stumbled, almost falling onto Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo subconsciously took a step back. Shuailan had already steadied himself. His gaze fell on Ning Xuemo, and a hint of pain flashed through his eyes. However, he smiled and said, You don't have to be afraid. I won't do anything to you. I know you've never loved me. He casually sat on a large rock and looked at the green mountains in the distance with a faint smile. I couldn't compete with him when he was alive, and I can't compete with him when he's dead. He raised the wine jug in his hand. Come, Shinjioli, let this king toast you. He smashed the jade wine jug to the ground, smashing it to pieces. The wine inside spilled all over the ground. Shuailan, you're drunk. Ning Xuemo frowned slightly. That's right, I'm drunk. I've been drunk for a long time, I also want to sober up. Shui Lan smiled. He looked at the shards on the ground and said, "Are you afraid of pricking him? I'll pick them up now." He squatted down and started to pick up the sharp jade shards on the ground. Ning Xuemo closed her eyes slightly. She only felt sorry for Shui Lan now. She couldn't give any response to his feelings. She waved her sleeves, and the sharp jade shards on the ground disappeared without a trace. She then flicked her finger, and a faint white light enveloped Shui Lan. When the white light dissipated, Shui Lan's alcohol was mostly gone. He shuddered and subconsciously turned back to look, but Ning Xuemo had already disappeared. Who was whose obsession? Who could say for sure in love? Chapter 1804. When the white light dissipated, Shui Lan's drunkenness was mostly gone. He shuddered and instinctively turned back to look, but Ning Xuemo was nowhere to be seen. He raised his head to look at the green mountain and closed his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking, or maybe he didn't want to think at all. The pursuit of 3 lifetimes was just a flashy bubble dream. He wanted to walk out of it, but he couldn't. The pursuit of 3 lifetimes had become his obsession. Maybe he needed to die to be free. Ning Xuemo executed her earth escape technique and traveled underground. Countless craggy boulders came at her, then suddenly disappeared. Her body was like smoke that could enter anywhere, quickly penetrating the ground. Rocks, underground rivers, corrosive soil. Even the monsters that resided deep underground were all overcome by her. This underground world didn't belong to any of the 6 realms. Darkness and suffocation were synonyms for this place. If Ning Xuemo wasn't a devil master with extremely high martial arts, she wouldn't have been able to reach this deep with just her earth escape technique. She didn't feel anything when she first entered the underground, but after staying for a while, she felt like she was being buried alive. That absolute darkness could drive people crazy. She didn't know how long she had traveled underground when a dark red river appeared in front of her. The river was extremely wide, and if she wanted to continue walking, she had to jump into the river and continue to dive deeper. She thought it was a lava river at first, but when she got closer, she realized it wasn't. This dark red river was extremely cold. Ning Xuemo casually threw a stone into the river, and with a cheat sound, the stone disappeared without a trace. It seemed like the water here was 100 times more corrosive than sulfuric acid. Ning Xuemo continuously threw a few things into the water. Everything that came into contact with the water would turn into bubbles. General Manager He Mu had once told her that Mother Earth didn't like to be disturbed, so ordinary immortals and devils couldn't reach the place she lived. There were a few dangerous passes to pass. This Red Spring River was one of them. The red spring water was even colder than the yellow spring water. If one wanted to pass through it, they would have to grab the unicorn that resided in the Red Spring River. They would have to peel off its skin and drape it over their bodies before they could enter the water. Ning Xuemo looked at the bubbling water in the Red Spring River. Where was the unicorn? How was she going to lure it out? Little Nianma was still waiting for her at home, so she did not want to waste any more time. She thought about it and set up an anti-corrosion wizardry barrier on her hand. If her hand was fine, she would cover her body with the wizardry barrier and jump directly. Just as she stretched out her hand, a ray of red light shot over before she could touch the water. Stop! She retracted her hand and subconsciously turned around. Shui Lan's figure appeared from behind a rock. His expression was solemn. Don't touch the river. Why are you here? Ning Xuemo blurted out. After asking that question, he felt that he was an idiot. Needless to say, Shui Lan had followed her down. It was just that she kept moving forward and did not expect someone to follow behind her, so she did not notice him. Of course, Shui Lan would not answer her nonsense. His gaze fell on the river, and his voice was indifferent. One drop of the red spring water can corrode the bones and never heal. You can't take this risk. It seemed that Shuailan was quite familiar with the terrain here. Ning Xuemo immediately asked him for advice. How do I get across? There is a unique unicorn in this river. You can peel its skin and make clothes to pass through. Chapter 1805. Ning Xuemo frowned. But I've been here for half a day and haven't seen any unicorns. How do we lure it out? Shuailan pursed his lips. I have a way. He suddenly rolled up his sleeves and used his palm like a knife to cut off the fleshy part of his arm. A piece of flesh the size of a child's palm was cut off. Blood immediately flowed out. Ning Xuemo's complexion changed. What are you doing? She raised her finger and a white light circled around Shuailan's injured arm, stopping the blood flow. Shuailan stared at her for a moment before turning his eyes away. He explained indifferently, using the flesh as bait can lure the beast out. Its skin is not afraid of any sword or saber. Its only weakness is its mouth. If you inject the 3 true fire into its mouth, it will be killed. As he spoke, he had already tossed the piece of flesh into the air. The piece of flesh floated above the river, about half a foot above the water's surface. It was unknown what method he used, but the smell of blood filled the entire space. Ning Xuemo didn't say anything. Instead, she took out a medicine bottle and threw it to him. Apply this. Shuailan didn't stand on ceremony. He took the bottle and applied the medicine to his wound without hesitation. Ning Xuemo had specially refined this medicine for people with devil and yao bodies. It was the right medicine to treat this kind of wound. After a moment, the wound already showed signs of healing. Many thanks. Ning Xuemo spoke. She knew he did it for her. Shuailan didn't look at her. He only replied indifferently, You don't need to be polite with me. He stood by the river, dressed in red. His pitch-black hair hung down to his side like satin. His posture was tall and straight, and his back was elegant and unique. He was like the youth she had met in the past. When he shed his enchanting charm, there was a hint of loneliness on his body. Ning Xuemo moved her eyes away. She didn't know what to feel in her heart. Back then, if Shuailan hadn't saved him, or if she had saved him instead of bringing him into the demonic path, would his fate have been different? She didn't want to think about it, nor did she want to think about it. Her gaze fell on the red spring river, and her fingers gripped the hilt of the sky splitter sword tightly. The red spring river began to bubble, and a moment later, a strange buzzing sound came from the sky. A wild beast that looked like a pufferfish but was 3 times larger and had a sharp horn on its head jumped out of the river. It opened its mouth full of sharp teeth and pounced on the piece of flesh. Now is the time. Ning Xuemo flew up and waved the sky splitter sword in her hand. A stream of samadhi true fire that she had long prepared was like a stream of light and a flash of lightning, flying straight towards the monster's big mouth. The monster was also a smart one. Its reaction was abnormally fast. It immediately closed its mouth. Ning Xuemo's 3 true fire hit its lips. Its lips were as tough as its skin. Ning Xuemo's sure-kill attack only left 2 blisters on its lips. It didn't cause any substantial damage. The unicorn was furious. It probably knew that its mouth was its only weakness. Although it was so angry that all the scales on its body stood up, it didn't open its mouth again. With a slap of its tail, a bright red wave of water splashed towards Ning Xuemo and Shuai. This red spring water corroded everything it touched. Nothing could stop it, so Ning Xuemo and Shuai could only dodge. Ning Xuemo's movements were fast, but Shuailan's movements were a bit slower. Just as a small wave of red spring water was about to splash onto his shoulder, Ning Xuemo's figure flashed like lightning. She suddenly pulled Shuailan and at the same time threw a large stone towards that wave of water. Chapter 1806. The water wave hit the big rock, which instantly disappeared. The water wave was blocked by the big rock and flowed to the ground, corroding a hole and flowing back into the Red Spring River. Shuailan's face was slightly pale. He turned to look at Ning Shuama beside him. If she hadn't moved quickly, his shoulder would have been cut off. Be careful. Don't let your mind wander. After Ning Shuama threw down these words, she flew away and directly rushed towards the unicorn. Shuailan's body stiffened, pain flashing through his eyes. At this time, it was like the time when he and Shui Mo fought side by side. He was her bodyguard, but hadn't she saved his life time and time again? The battle was in progress, so he didn't have the time to think any further. His figure flashed and flew towards the unicorn as well. Lead it to a place without water, Ning Shuama said. The two tried to lead the unicorn to the shore. However, the unicorn was also very cunning. It seemed to know that it couldn't do anything without water, so once Ning Shuama and Shuailan got too far away from the water, it couldn't attack them with waves, so it wanted to sink into the water. Damn it! It actually had the intelligence of the sand monk. Ning Shuama cursed in her heart. She steeled her heart and slashed the sky splitter sword across her palm. Blood flowed out and dripped onto the unicorn's head. Since the unicorn liked to eat flesh, she only needed to use her blood to lead it to the shore and then cook it. Her plan wasn't bad, but for some reason, the unicorn wasn't interested in her blood. Her blood had dripped onto its head, but it could still turn a blind eye to it. Fuck. She had the demon lord's blood. Even the demon lord's blood was despised. Was it just blood? Did it still need meat? If you can't bear to part with the child, you can't trap the wolf. Ning Shuama steeled her heart and was about to cut off a piece of flesh from her arm. Shuailan was already above her. Your blood won't do. Use mine. He also cut his palm and let the blood drip down. The unicorn's small eyes suddenly opened wide, like a heavy smoker who suddenly smelled smoke. With a splash, it jumped out of the water and opened its mouth to bite Shuailan's hand. Use the 3 true fire. Shuailan shouted. Instead of retreating, he moved forward. He stretched out his arm, and half of his fist actually went into the monster's mouth. The monster clenched its sharp teeth, causing blood to spurt out. However, it could not bite down. The bones in Shuailan's hand became harder than diamond. Shuailan was unable to break it in a short period of time, and of course, it was unable to close its mouth. Ning Shuama's heart suddenly tightened. Shuailan had sacrificed a hand to create this opportunity for her, so of course she couldn't miss it. With a wave of her hand, the 3 true flames were released once again. Like a flash of lightning, it drilled into the mouth of the unicorn that couldn't close. Her 3 true flames were extremely pure. How could the unicorn withstand it? With a pitiful cry, it fell onto the shore with a thud. Its body twitched a few times, and then it stopped moving. Ning Shuama didn't care about the unicorn. She first looked at Shuailan's hand, and then she sucked in a breath of cold air. Shuailan's hand was completely gone, and only a piece of white bone was left. His face was deathly pale, but he still had a carefree attitude. It's okay. I'm a demon king. This hand can still recover. You go and deal with the unicorn first. Ning Shuama took a deep breath and only said one sentence. Give me your hand. She had a kind of aura that didn't allow people to refuse. Shuailan was startled for a moment, and slowly handed over the white bone hand. Chapter 1807. Not only were the unicorn's teeth sharp, but its tongue was also corrosive. It melted the skin and flesh of the hand that he put into its mouth. Ning Xuemo first used a cleaning spell to clean him, then took out the flesh revitalization ointment that Shinjioli had made and applied it on him. Shinjioli had said that as long as his ointment was applied, even if only bones were left, the flesh and blood could be restored. It just needed a slightly longer time. Shuailan lowered his eyes to look at her, who was busy with his hand. There was clearly only bones left on his hand, and he couldn't feel anything, but when her little hand held onto his bone hand and applied the ointment, he could still feel a warm current surging up. Then, a tinge of sadness flashed past his eyes. He knew that she was treating him purely for the sake of her companions. In her heart, he was at most a friend. Ning Xuemo's hands were fast, and she quickly finished bandaging him. She then instructed him, meditate and heal your injuries for now, I'll skin it. Shuailan didn't argue with her and nodded. He quickly explained the main points of skinning this kind of unicorn before meditating to recover. Since Ning Xuemo had been a physician before, her skinning skills were naturally practiced to perfection. After she grasped the main points, she immediately started. In less than an hour, the skin of the monster was peeled off by her. This unicorn's skin is big enough to sew 2 people's robes. Sew one for me too, Shuailan said. Ning Xuemo frowned. Shuailan, you don't have to follow me, you should return to the surface first. I don't need anyone to follow me. It was dangerous to find Mother Earth, and she didn't want Shuailan to follow her into danger. She also didn't want to owe him a favor. Xuemo, if you don't want to sew for me, I can hunt another one after you leave, Shuailan said indifferently. What he meant was that he was going to follow her. Ning Xuemo felt a headache coming on. Shuailan, why are you so stubborn, Xuemo? I'm not being stubborn, and I'm not being selfish. You're the demon master, the backbone of both the demon realm and the demon realm. It's only right for me to protect you. Don't worry, I know my place in your heart, and I won't cause you any trouble. When he said that, Ning Xuemo couldn't refute him anymore. However, she knew that Shuailan had feelings for her. If she continued to be involved with him, she was afraid that this kind of thing would happen more often in the future. She paused and was about to rephrase her words. Shuailan spoke again, Xuemo, I'm not here to protect you for nothing. I have a favor to ask of you. Ning Xuemo raised her eyebrows. Go ahead. As long as it wasn't a matter of forced feelings, she could agree to anything. Shuailan stared at her. Xuemo, I know that it's impossible between you and me. In order to protect the Snow Mermaid clan, I'm interested in that Ice Jade Fairy. Ice Jade Fairy also has feelings for me, but she's a fairy, and I'm a demon. According to the rules of the demon realm, fairies and demons can't love each other. Otherwise, she'll suffer from the heavenly tribulation, unless the celestial emperor personally promises to marry her. Ning Xuemo was stunned. Shuailan finally had the idea of marrying her. She still had a very good impression of that Ice Jade Fairy. It was as if a huge rock had been removed from her heart. She couldn't help but smile. When did you and Ice Jade Fairy meet? Shuailan glanced at her face and saw her smile. It was a genuine smile of relaxation, and nothing else. His eyes darkened. Chapter 1808. His eyes darkened for a second, but then returned to normal. When I was sealing Zisha, I cooperated with her. We cooperated very happily. After we came out, we drank a few more times, and we got along very well. The reason I came here to find you is because I want you to stand out and seek justice for us. No problem. Ning Xuemo said almost without hesitation. Don't worry, the Heaven Emperor will still give me face. Then, thank you. Shuailan smiled. His smile was as beautiful as a spring flower. "We are friends, so you are welcome." Ning Xuemo answered quickly. "I am relieved to hear that. Xuemo, go and sew the robes. Remember to give me one." At this point, Shui Lan had obviously made up his mind. Even if Ning Xuemo didn't let him follow, he would follow behind secretly. It was better to go together, and they could take care of each other. She had no choice but to use the unicorn skin to make 2 leather robes and gave one to Shui Lan. She was still worried, so she looked at his injured arm. "You are now, don't worry. Even if I lose an arm, I can still move as usual, not to mention that it is just a flesh wound." Shui Lan smiled elegantly, but his tone was firm. "Let's go." He put on the leather robe and sealed it completely with a spell. Then, he jumped into the Red Spring River. Ning Xuemo followed suit and jumped in as well. In the sealed leather robes, they couldn't see the water with their eyes. Fortunately, their skills were high enough to open their third eye. Their third eye was different from ordinary third eyes. After opening their third eye, they could see the scenery outside clearly. Although the Red Spring River melted everything it saw, it was only for ordinary things. There were still some strange species in the river. When Ning Xuemo walked in the water, she found several kinds of animals, including fish and shrimps. Of course, they looked different from those commonly seen on land. Every animal had a mouthful of sharp fangs. Even shrimps could eat meat. The natural selection inside wasn't any worse than the outside world. All kinds of creatures would fight to the death if they encountered one another. Naturally, Ning Xuemo's pouches also attracted the attacks of other creatures. A few strange-looking big fishes almost bit open Shui Lan's leather robe. Fortunately, Ning Xuemo followed closely behind and pulled the big fish away with both hands. The big fish's skin could not be broken, so she simply used her palm strength to directly shatter the big fish's internal organs. Then, she threw it out, attracting a few more strange fish to snatch it. Fortunately, Ning Xuemo didn't want to swim in the Red Spring River. She just wanted to go through it. The two of them helped each other to drive away the other carnivorous creatures. After a short while, they reached the bottom of the river and dived into the red mud below. The red mud was extremely difficult to pass through even with the ground drilling technique. Ning Xuemo was fine, but Shui Lan was not as strong as her, and he was injured. After they got out of the red mud area, the two of them came to a wide undercurrent where they could rest for a while. The two of them took off their tight leather robes. Shui Lan's face was pale, and his red lips were also pale. Ning Xuemo glanced at him, then sat down on a big rock. "Let's take a rest." There was no air deep underground. Fortunately, the two of them could breathe with their telekinesis, so they didn't feel suffocated. "How's your injury?" Ning Xuemo's eyes fell on the bandage on his hand. There was blood seeping out from it again. "It's fine. I used a little bit of strength when I used the spell just now, so it opened up a little. It's starting to heal now." Shui Lan's eyes were like water, and he smiled casually. Chapter 1809. Ning Xuemo was very confident in Shinjuli's medicine. Hearing Shui Lan's words, she was relieved. "I'll lead the way later. Try to use as little telekinesis as possible. Just focus on healing your wounds." "Okay." Shui Lan agreed. He was still in the mood to joke, "Then the capable will have more work. I can just be a follower in the back." The two of them chatted for a while, and the atmosphere became more harmonious. Shui Lan lowered his eyes slightly. How long had it been since he had interacted with her without any grudges? "Shui Lan, have you been here before?" Ning Xuemo felt that Shui Lan was extraordinarily familiar with the terrain here. Shui Lan paused for a moment and said, "Yes, I was here 50,000 years ago." He sighed again. The world above has changed a lot, but this place hasn't changed much. 50,000 years ago. He remembered what happened 50,000 years ago. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Since she had nothing to do, she decided to ask him about what happened 50,000 years ago. Shui Lan didn't hide anything and told her about his experience 50,000 years ago. Ning Xuema remembered her dream about the Devil Lord. When she was the Devil Lord, she unified the two realms of monsters and demons. If Shui Lan was the Devil Lord, there was no reason why she didn't know about it. She asked about the years and counted silently. It seemed that the Devil Lord Xuema was before Shui Lan. Was Shui Lan also related to her in that era? She asked, "Did you know me 50,000 years ago?" Shui Lan looked at her, paused for a moment, and shook his head. "No, I only heard about you." What did you hear about me?" "I heard that you were the Devil Lord, the spiritual leader of the three realms of monsters and demons. You were on par with Shinjiuli. Anything else?" "I haven't heard of anything else. I heard that you lived in seclusion on the 35th floor of the heavens and didn't return to the demon realm for hundreds of years." Ning Xuema stopped talking. At that time, Shinjiuli lived on the 36th floor of heaven, but she lived on the 35th floor of heaven. Could it be that she was pestering Shinjiuli to be her husband at that time? Too busy to care about what happens next. She thought about the character of Xuema in her dream. She didn't seem like a person who really cared about the big picture and was responsible for the rise and fall of the monsters and demons. She unified the demon realm only because those demons bullied her. She didn't want to be bullied, so she dealt with those big and small demons. As for unifying the devil realm, her goal was even simpler. She only wanted the flower that could make her grow faster. Therefore, after she hid in the 35th heaven, even if the monster realm and devil realm were in a mess, she was too lazy to care. Ning Xuema raised her hand and rubbed the space between her eyebrows. She hadn't dreamt enough about the dream 50,000 years ago. There were still many inside stories that she didn't know. The two of them rested for a while. Ning Xuema saw that Shui Lan's complexion finally looked better. She then looked at his hand without batting an eyelid. His hand was no longer bleeding, so he should have recovered. Shui Lan was a considerate person. He stood up and said, "Let's go." In a cold and dark sea of bones. Yes, there was a sea of bones in front of her. However, the bones here weren't deathly white, but pitch black. Every bone seemed to have been roasted in a big fire, glowing with a gloomy luster. Ning Xuema felt like she was in the 10,000 beast bone pit, where all kinds of bones were present. All kinds of animal leg bones, skulls, arm bones, tailbones, ribs, pelvic bones. They were densely overlapped, but all the tips were pointing upwards. All kinds of bone spurs were like swords, pointing upwards. Chapter 18:10. If the two of them wanted to continue forward, they would have to pass through this forest of bones. Ning Xuema also knew that everything underground could not be judged with common sense, so she first used the shark veil to roll up a piece of bone to take a look. She felt a chill in her heart. This bone was as hard as iron and cold to the touch. Her shark veil, which was impervious to all poisons, only wrapped around it slightly before it began to melt. If Ning Xuema did not let go quickly, she was afraid that a layer of her skin would have melted. This sea of bones was the same as the Red Spring River. They could not go around it and could only pass through it. "We can set up a barrier to pass through here." Shui Lan spoke beside her and added, "Set up a wood barrier. Be careful not to touch those skulls. It should be fine." Ning Xuema did not say anything and set up a wood barrier for herself first. "I will scout ahead, before she could finish speaking, Shui Lan had already rushed to the front. His voice sounded like he was laughing yet not laughing. Shuama, you should let your subordinates clear the way. In any case, I have been here once before. I have more experience than you. He took out his sword and flames that were about a foot long appeared on it. From time to time, he would slash the various bones that were blocking the way as he rushed forward. Ning Shuama naturally followed behind him. These bones were extremely strange. They had a very strong regenerative ability. Shui Lan used all his strength to slash the bones that were blocking the way. However, as the two of them walked in front, the bones behind them would recover to their original state. It was extremely strange. These bones grew at different speeds. Some of the bones that had just been broken, and before they could rush over, they would grow back with a whoosh. They were like sharp swords that almost pierced the two of them. Fortunately, Ning Shuama reacted quickly. If she felt that something was wrong, the Sky Splitter sword in her hand would attack and slash those bones again. This sea of bones that was rumored to be the most difficult to pass through was actually easily passed through with Shui Lan's help. When they reached the other side, Ning Shuama let out a long sigh of relief. General Manager He Mu had said that there was an extremely strange monster hidden in the sea of bones. Every time someone tried to pass through, they would be intercepted and killed by it. Very few people were lucky enough to escape. She had been on guard with the Sky Splitter sword just now, but now it seemed that she was fine. It seemed that the monster had fallen asleep at the bottom of the sea and had not sensed anyone passing through. This time, Shui Lan had put in the most effort to get through the bone sea. Naturally, he had sweated the most. His red robes were drenched in sweat, and he looked like he had just been fished out of the water. Probably because his sweat had soaked his wounds, there was even a faint smell of blood on his body. As soon as he reached the other side, he immediately sat down. He didn't even have the strength to use the cleansing spell. He raised his sleeve to wipe the sweat on his forehead and closed his eyes for a moment. Ning Shuama didn't say anything, but used a cleansing spell on him, making him dry again. Because it was still dark underground, Ning Shuama couldn't see the color of his robes clearly. She could only faintly feel that his robes seemed to have become even redder. "How are you?" Ning Shuama gave him a pill to recover his psychokinesis. Shui Lan took it and ate it. He then raised his finger and pointed towards the southeast. "Shuama, that Mother Earth is in Mythical Fire Palace, 10 miles away from here. You can go and find her yourself." Ning Shuama's heart stirred. So Shui Lan had already known her motive for coming here. She looked at Shui Lan. "What about you? You're not going." There was only a mechanism formation in front of them, and with Ning Shuama's abilities, mere mechanisms naturally couldn't trouble her. It was the easiest place to pass. Shui Lan had stopped here. Shui Lan's eyes seemed to have water ripples, and he seemed to be smiling yet not smiling. "What? Shuama, you can't leave me now." Chapter 18:11. This scoundrel. He wasn't serious for long, and now he's not serious again. Ning Shuama couldn't be bothered with him and turned to leave. Shui Lan's voice rang out behind her. "Shuama, I have another favor to ask of you." These words sounded quite serious. Ning Shuama turned her head and asked, "Is there anything else?" Shui Lan took out a box from his chest. "Help me ask Mother Earth what kind of flower this is." Ning Shuama opened it to take a look. It was a kind of purple flower specimen that was the size of the legendary tyrant flower. Folded in the box, it looked like an umbrella. This flower looked very strange, and Ning Shuama didn't recognize it. She closed the box again and took a glance at Shui Lan. "This is the demon flower you wanted me to admire." Shui Lan nodded his head. That's right, back then it was like a mushroom pavilion, and the bottom was covered in spores. There were over 100 of them in the demon realm, and they were extremely beautiful, so I wanted you to go and admire them. However, when we returned from Mount Jai, this flower withered and scattered with the wind. I only managed to save this one. Help me ask, it's rare for a flower to bloom in the demon realm, so it's good to know its species. Since you're here, why don't you let Mother Earth explain it to you personally? Ning Xuema was bewildered. Shui Lan revealed his signature smile again. Xuema, you actually still want me to accompany you, right? In that case, I'll go with you. He acted as if he was about to stand up. I really feel that it's better for you to squat here. Ning Xuema felt that she couldn't be too nice to Shui Lan. This fellow knew how to take advantage of the situation. If you gave him some face, he would want to open a dye house. Ning Xuema's figure floated forward and disappeared in an instant. That fellow was exhausted, so it was good for him to rest there. It was just asking about a flower, it was nothing. Ning Xuema thought so, but she did not look back. Shui Lan watched her figure disappear into the distance. He lowered his eyes slightly and focused on his feet. At some point in time, 2 thin black threads had drilled into his feet and wrapped around his ankles twice. They were very similar to Yu Lao's red threads, except that they were black. Moreover, the black thread that wrapped around his feet was flowing with his blood. The other end of the thread wasn't tied to his lover either. Instead, it stretched straight into the depths of the sea of bones, as if it was the 2 tentacles of a monster. These 2 black lines were extremely thin. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be seen at all. The Lightfire Palace was a lonely palace. It was built in the depths of a burning swamp. The whole palace was dark, and there was not a single light in it. Ning Xuema destroyed 3 traps along the way and finally arrived in front of the palace gate. Black plants crawled all over the palace gates, each strand of which looked like a tree root or a snake, sending chills down one's spine. The gate was tightly shut, and the entire palace was filled with these plants. It was as if there were no living creatures inside. It was simply like a place where an old witch lived. What exactly did this Mother Earth look like? Wasn't she lonely living in the depths of this pitch-black underground? Ning Xuema shook her head secretly and knocked on the door. Mother Earth, Devil Master Xuemo requests an audience. She said it thrice, but there was no response from inside. It can't be, right? Could he not be at home? She raised her hand and was about to knock again, but she didn't expect the door to suddenly collapse inwards, forming a black hole that led straight inside. Ning Xuema was skilled and daring, so she immediately stepped inside. Chapter 18:12. Passing through that pitch-black hole, she entered a huge hall that was filled with brown tree roots. She finally saw the legendary Mother Earth. She thought Mother Earth would be a person that looked like an old witch, but when she saw her appearance clearly, it was still out of her expectations. That was a person that had yin and yang in one body. His upper body was that of a woman, and his long brown hair flowed to the ground. He had a small face with delicate features, full breasts and a slender waist. However, his lower body was that of a man, and his 2 long legs were abnormally thick. Only the important parts were covered by a large leaf that could barely cover them, making him look abnormally strange. Beneath his 2 legs were not 2 feet. Instead, they were forked tree roots that went deep into the ground and blended in with the surrounding tree roots. Is this Mother Earth a spirit from some big tree that came to life? This was Ning Xuema's first thought. Her second thought was that this Mother Earth looked familiar, as though she had seen her before. That Mother Earth had a pair of jade green eyes, and she looked at Ning Xuema. Her gaze seemed to be flickering with fluorescence. Hee hee, Devil Master. I didn't expect you to come again, come again. Could she have already come here before? That should be 50,000 years ago, right? No wonder she felt this Mother Earth looked familiar. Ning Xuema didn't come here to exchange greetings, so she nodded her head. Xuema is here to ask for guidance. That Mother Earth's gaze was unfathomable, and she smiled. Seeing how you risked your life to come here, I can tell you everything I know. She didn't expect this Mother Earth to be so easy to talk to. Ning Xuema thought she would make things difficult for her a few times. She let out a sigh of relief and took out those broken petals from her storage space. May I ask Mother Earth, what species are these flowers? What are their uses? Mother Earth's gaze swept across those flowers, and her gaze shrunk slightly. Where did you get these flowers from? They were given to me by someone. Mother Earth raised her hand, and those broken petals landed in her hand. She looked at those flowers in a slight daze, and after some time, she sighed gently. I didn't expect that person to really gather all these flowers. Her gaze fell on Ning Xuema, sizing her up from head to toe. Ning Xuema's heart trembled, and her gaze turned sharp. Are you talking about God Shinjiuli? Could it be that Shinjiuli had given her the flowers because of Mother Earth's guidance? Mother Earth's gaze was distant. He didn't report his name, I don't know who he is. However, that person is an outstanding talent among men. He is very handsome. Why is he looking for you? Ning Xuema interrupted her. Mother Earth's gaze focused on her body again. You probably don't know my true identity. Ning Xuema looked at her without saying anything. She knew that she would continue. Little girl, you've probably only heard of this consort's reputation, so you came here recklessly. I'm Mother Earth, the mother of this god-devil continent. I control all the flowers and plants on this god-devil continent, and I'm even known as the medicine god. There's no chronic disease in this world that I can't cure, and there's no flower that I can't recognize. The mother of god-devil continent was also the creator of this continent. No wonder she was called Mother Earth. No wonder she would call her little girl. Since she had a request, Ning Xuema still had a good temper. After listening to her, she asked in a timely manner, May Mother Earth please enlighten me on the functions and origins of these flowers. Mother Earth took a look at her. Little girl is very impatient. She stopped being long-winded and started to introduce the origin and functions of those flowers. Chapter 1813. Ning Xuema listened attentively and was slightly bewildered. Other than the place where these flowers were produced was special, they were basically all from barren hills and unruly rivers, and they were basically guarded by evil beasts. However, such flowers that were hard to pick had ordinary effects. Some caused hallucinations, some cured poison, some promoted blood circulation. There weren't any other special effects. In that case, why did Shinjiuli pick these flowers so painstakingly for her? Just to make her feel touched just because it wasn't easy? Shinjiuli wouldn't be so lame. Finally, Mother Earth finished explaining all the flowers she had taken. That pair of lush green eyes looked at Ning Xuema. Alright, I've finished explaining all the effects of each of them, are you satisfied? Lightning seemed to have flashed in Ning Xuema's mind and she immediately asked, then what's their combined effect? For example, giving a bouquet of these flowers to a certain person every day, what effect can be achieved by giving them for a few consecutive days? Mother Earth's gaze shrunk slightly and she smiled. Little girl is very smart. There was indeed something fishy about giving them all. Ning Xuema smiled slightly and waited for Mother Earth to clear her doubts. Mother Earth's gaze landed on those withered petals and she said leisurely, actually, these flowers aren't complete. Ning Xuema raised her eyebrows. Shinjiuli had given her flowers for a month consecutively, and even though these flowers were all ruined by her, they were all found back in the end. Even though most of them were just branches or petals, however, she still managed to gather all 30 kinds of flowers, so why did she say it wasn't complete? She waited quietly for Mother Earth to continue. Mother Earth didn't disappoint her and continued, I asked him to gather 36 kinds of flowers to fulfill all his wishes, but I didn't expect him to only gather 30 kinds. What a pity. What a pity. Ning Xuema's heart almost jumped out. What's his wish? Mother Earth examined her again. Were you unable to grow up originally? Yes. Ning Xuema didn't deny it. Have you lost your memory before? Yes. That's it. If these flowers are separated, they don't have many excellent functions. But if they are gathered together, they have 2 functions. Actually, it has the effect of curing illnesses. If you collect 30 types of flowers and let the patient touch all 30 types of flowers, the last type of flower's pollen can be inhaled into the patient's mouth. If the patient breathes in a breath of God's breath, it can cure the whirling crystal flower's poison and allow the patient to recover to their normal growth rate. Ning Xuema's face turned slightly pale. What are you doing? To treat your chronic illness. This was what Shinjiulik said after he kissed her forcefully when he gave her the bouquet of flowers. At that time, she thought he was taking advantage of the opportunity to take advantage of her. It turned out that he was really treating her chronic illness. However, it wasn't her heart disease, but her chronic disease of not being able to grow up. In his previous life, Xuema had indeed stopped growing after eating a type of flower poison called whirling heavenly crystal. In that case, what's the effect if I collect all 36 types of flowers? Ning Xuema looked at Mother Earth's face. Mother Earth smiled. These flowers actually have a strange characteristic. When 2 or more types are collected, a heavenly fire flower will grow where the collector lives. When he collects all 36 types of flowers, 36 heavenly fire flowers will grow in his flower bed. When these 36 heavenly fire flowers are gathered, a red bean blood flower will bloom. Eating this flower can cure any amnesia caused by spells, and you will never lose your memory. Ning Xuema, so this was the effect of the heavenly fire flower that Shinjiuli had always been protecting. Back then, when she had accidentally destroyed his heavenly fire flower, his heart ached because of this. Chapter 1814. So this was the effect of the heavenly fire flower that Shinjiuli had been protecting. When she accidentally destroyed his heavenly fire flower, his heart ached because of this. Needless to say, the reason he wanted to cultivate the blood flower of red bean was for her to eat, to let her recover all her memories. No matter if it was pain or hatred, he would stay by her side and give her an explanation. Some misunderstandings could only be solved after the parties recovered their memories. However, this memory loss didn't seem to be suitable for her. It was more suitable for him. After all, he slept for 900 years and forgot everything when he woke up. He should be the one eating the blood flower of red bean. Then who did he prepare this flower for? For her or for himself? Ning Xuema thought about it carefully, and her heart suddenly moved. The heavenly fire flower that she destroyed wasn't just 36 stalks. She felt that there were many more. Could it be that he cultivated double the amount? With Shinjiuli's intelligence and abilities, it was indeed possible for him to cultivate double the amount. Ning Xuema stood there in a daze. She finally solved the mystery of Shinjiuli's flowers, but she still couldn't find the reason why he had to die. Before Shinjiuli returned to Fantian Palace, he tried his best to get her back. He made these flowers to treat her chronic illness and recover her memories. Moreover, she treasured the remaining heavenly fire flower very much. However, after he returned to the Fantian Palace, everything changed. He only wanted to cure her chronic illness and didn't care about the heavenly fire flower that was left in her Mo Palace. This showed that he didn't want her to recover her memories at that time. He even deliberately gave her the cold shoulder, making her feel even more indifferent towards him. This also showed that after he recovered his memories from 50,000 years ago in Enchanting Palace, he probably realized that he had to die, which was why he did that later on. He arranged everything calmly and met his death calmly. It seemed like the answer she was looking for was still in Enchanting Palace. However, she had already turned Enchanting Palace upside down. Other than the dreams that she had when her soul left her body, she didn't find anything meaningful. She thought she could find the real answer on this trip to Mother Earth, but she didn't expect that the answer was still in the fog. She couldn't see it clearly no matter what. This made her a little disappointed, but there was nothing she could do. Just as she was about to bid farewell, she suddenly remembered the box that Shuailan had given her. She hurriedly took it out and said, "Mother Earth, there's still a flower that needs to be identified." She passed the box over. Mother Earth took it and took a look. Her gaze congealed slightly, and she suddenly raised her head to look at Ningxuama. "Where did you get this flower from?" "Demon Realm." "How long has this flower been blooming?" Ningxuama roughly counted the days and said, "It's been about 10 days. Mother Earth frowned slightly. 10 days. Doesn't that mean they are everywhere? Does the Demon Realm still exist? Ningxuama's heart skipped a beat. The flowers have already withered, but they are not blooming everywhere. The Demon Realm is still as usual. I wonder what this flower is for. It can devour the Demon Realm. Mother Earth said, Ziwu Chang. This flower was known as the Flower of Chaos. Once this flower blooms, the purple fiend that can destroy heaven and earth will erupt within 3 days. Once the purple fiend erupts, this flower will bloom all over the 6 realms. The flower spores will infect all living beings in the 6 realms with the poison of the purple fiend, turning them into mindless monsters that only know how to kill. Ningxuama was speechless. So this flower was so evil. It seemed that this flower didn't only grow in the demon realm, it grew in other places too. It was just that he didn't get the news. Chapter 18:15. This Mother Earth was so knowledgeable, maybe she knew what happened 50,000 years ago. Mother Earth's gaze landed on Ningxuama again. Since this flower has already withered, the purple fiend must have been sealed again, right? Yes. May I know how this purple fiend was born? Ningxuama took the chance to ask. Mother Earth smiled, and her gaze was profound. Heaven and earth are out of harmony, and the heavenly Tao is in chaos, that's why this thing is born. Ningxuama lowered her eyes and thought for a moment. She asked again, what do you mean by heaven and earth are out of harmony, and the heavenly Tao is in chaos? Can Mother Earth give an example? Before the purple fiend erupted, she didn't feel anything wrong with heaven and earth, let alone the heavenly Tao being in chaos. However, Mother Earth suddenly became contemplative. This is a mystery of heaven, it can't be revealed. Ningxuama. She faintly felt that she was close to the truth, yet there was still a layer of fog separating her. Mother Earth, Shuama still has something to ask. If a person's soul is scattered, can they gather back together? Mother Earth replied coolly, you can go and beg the god. Ningxuama's heart stirred. Which also meant that Shinjioli had the ability to revive a person whose soul had scattered. In that case, what if the one whose soul had scattered is the god? Ningxuama held her breath. Mother Earth paused for a moment, and her reply sent Ningxuama straight to hell. Gods are born with the will of heaven and earth, their souls won't scatter. They will only experience calamities and become immortal, disappearing completely. Ningxuama's face turned pale. Disappearing completely. No matter what method we use, we can't revive them anymore. Mother Earth lowered her eyes, and her reply this time was slightly mysterious. It's hard to say, heaven and earth need a master, maybe the god will appear again in 100 years. Ning Xuema. Mother Earth's words were like a shot of cardiac stimulant for her. He would appear again in 100 years. It was even earlier than what he had promised her. Her eyes lit up. This news was more meaningful than any other news to her. Her heart almost jumped out of her chest. This was the best and most encouraging answer she had gotten since Shinjioli left. Little Nianma would be overjoyed if he heard the news. In such a short period of time, her mood had risen and fallen twice. Happiness came too quickly. She wanted to confirm it again. Will God really return in 100 years? Mother Earth looked at her shining eyes and smiled meaningfully. Probably. But what? Mother Earth closed her eyes. The secrets of heaven cannot be revealed. Heavenly secret, your sister. Ning Xuema didn't give up and asked her a few more questions. However, this Mother Earth seemed to have fallen asleep and didn't reply anymore. Ning Xuema wasn't too disappointed. After all, she had received confirmation that Shinjioli could return again. This was better than anything else. She couldn't dig up any more solid information, so she got up and took her leave. Mother Earth looked at her back view disappearing at the door and licked her lips. A demon with a bit of divine bloodline. That must be a wonderful feeling. Poor little girl. She was destined to not be able to see the return of the god. This little girl probably didn't know the rules of meeting Mother Earth. Mother Earth could only be met once. If she was unlucky enough to meet Mother Earth for the second time, she would have to pay the price with blood. Her life would be left here, unless she moved her body slightly and pulled out a blood-stained root. She dipped her finger in the blood and put it in her mouth. That little demon's blood was also very good. It was very pure. Chapter 18:16. Ning Xuema came out and quickly returned to the Sea of Bones. Shuailan was still sitting there, looking at the Sea of Bones. His back looked rather lonely. This guy was really meditating here. Was he not afraid that a monster would come out and eat him? She was in a good mood now, and Shuailan was very pleasing to the eye. She deliberately walked over with heavy footsteps. It seemed that Shuailan was indeed meditating. He only noticed her when she was almost beside him. He turned his head and said, "Xuema, you are finally back." "Yes, let's go back." Ning Xuema was full of joy that Shinjioli would return after 100 years. She did not notice Shuailan's expression. Shuailan looked at her shining eyes. There was a flash of sadness in his eyes, but he smiled gently. "It seems that you have gained a lot." Ning Xuema's eyes curved into crescents as she hummed in agreement. She threw the box back to Shuailan. "Here, I've already asked for you. This flower is called." She told him about Mother Earth's introduction of this flower. Shuailan frowned. He thought that the beautiful flower represented a kind of beauty, but he did not expect that, the more beautiful the flower, the more poisonous it was. He raised his hand, and a ball of fire ignited from the box. It burned into ashes in the blink of an eye. Ning Xuema was not surprised. It was better to burn such a disaster as soon as possible. Shuailan handled it well. The Sea of Bones had completely returned to normal. If Ning Xuema and Shuailan wanted to go back, they would have to go through it like before. Ning Xuema was eager to go back. Although there was no hourglass here, Ning Xuema had her own way of counting the time. Until now, she had been out for 2 days. She promised little Nianma that she would stay for 3 days. She had to go back on time to prevent the child from worrying. "Shuailan, I'll take the front this time." You cover the rear, Ning Xuemo instructed. Okay. This time, Shui Lan agreed very quickly. It was rare that he didn't argue with her. He stood up. Probably because he had been sitting for too long, the moment he stood up, he staggered and fell onto Ning Xuemo. He was still holding a sword in his hand. Coincidentally, the tip of the sword had cut Ning Xuemo's arm. The cut was not light. Fresh blood flowed out and fell to the ground. You. Ning Xuemo wasn't on guard against him at the moment, and her mind was completely focused on the sea of bones in front of her. That was why she was cut by him. She couldn't help but push him away and retreat 2 steps like flowing water. What are you doing? What kind of trick did this guy come up with this time? Shui Lan rubbed the space between his eyebrows and laughed carelessly. It's nothing. I sat for too long and my feet slipped. I didn't hurt you, did I? Aw, you're bleeding so much. He took 2 steps forward and used his foot to wipe the blood away, trying to erase the evidence. Ning Xuemo. She looked at her arm. It was just a small cut. Shui Lan's sword wasn't poisonous. It seemed that he really had failed. Ning Xuemo casually applied some medicine on her arm. She was a devil master, so her recovery abilities were strong. With the help of the medicine, her wound healed abnormally fast. A moment later, the wound had already healed and nothing could be seen. She felt that Shui Lan's behavior was a bit strange today. She couldn't help but glance at him. Shui Lan's complexion was not as pale as before. There was a bit of color in his face. When he saw Ning Xuemo turn around to look at him, he smiled at her flirtatiously. Xuemo, after going through so much, you still think I'm good-looking, don't you? Chapter 18-17. When he saw Ning Xuemo looking back at him, he smiled and said, Xuemo, after going through so much, you still think that I'm good-looking, don't you? Ning Xuemo was speechless. She had the urge to kick him. She strode forward and said, Shui Lan, you can be more narcissistic. Shui Lan's eyes dimmed, but he quickly caught up with her and said with a smile, I'm just telling the truth. Ning Xuemo ignored him. She held the Sky Splitter sword in her hand and injected her psychokinesis into it. An arc of fire appeared and slashed towards the black bones. The black bones all fell to the ground. Ning Xuemo's figure leaped up, and she floated away. Shui Lan followed closely behind her. She was indeed the Devil Lord. Her power was much higher than Shui Lan's. Wherever her sword went, the black bones, no matter how hard and sharp they were all destroyed. Even the speed of regeneration was not as fast as before. The 2 of them had an easy journey. Shui Lan was more free this time, so he was in the mood to chat with Ning Xuemo. Xuemo, will Shinjiuli come back to life? How did you know that I came here to ask about his resurrection? Ning Xuemo asked. Was there a need to ask? He could guess. Other than Shinjiuli, who else could make her so desperate? I guessed. Seeing that you look so relaxed, it seems that he will come back. Yes, he will come back. He is a god, so this world must have a master, Ning Xuemo replied. Shui Lan, who was behind her, paused. Aren't you the master of heaven and earth? Ning Xuemo was stunned. She felt as if she had been hit on the head. What? Only then did Shui Lan realize his slip of the tongue. He smiled and said, I was just joking. You are the Devil Master. You are only the master of the monster realm and devil realm. You are not the master of the 6 realms. That's right, how could I possibly be the master of heaven and earth? I'm just a devil master, I can't replace him. The Ning Xuemo also chimed in, seemingly trying to convince Shuailan as well as himself. I'm different from him, I'm different from him. That's right, Mother Earth said he could be reborn after 100 years. If I can replace him, he won't be able to be reborn after 100 years. This shows that I can't replace him. Fortunately, Shuailan understood what she was saying. He didn't say anything behind her back. Hey, Shuailan, do you understand? Ning Xuemo was eager to find an agreement. Understood, understood. Then do you agree with what I said? Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Xuemo is the smartest, you can even straighten out such a complicated logical relationship. Shuailan's voice had a smile in it. Only then did Ning Xuemo let out a sigh of relief. She was in a hurry to get out, so the sword in her hand danced even faster and more urgently. The black bones that filled the sky were swept far away by the blazing sword wind. Wherever the two of them passed by, it was as if a hurricane had blown past. Shuailan looked at her from behind, and a hint of pain flashed past his eyes. Shuailan, what do you mean by heaven and earth being out of harmony, heavenly Tao being in chaos? Because Ning Xuemo didn't have memories from a very long time ago, she didn't know much about these kinds of things. Shuailan seemed to be slightly unsettled, and he didn't say anything behind her. Shuailan. Shuailan finally answered, here. I'm asking you a question. What do you mean by heaven and earth being out of harmony, heavenly Tao being in chaos? Shuailan replied without thinking, it's when there's an abnormality in heaven and earth, right? And it's an abnormality that can't be changed by human strength, for example, two suns appearing in the sky. As the saying goes, there can't be two suns in the sky. Chapter 1818. Ning Xuemo chuckled and said, 2 suns are nothing. There was once an era when there were 9 suns. The earth was in a drought, and the people had no way to make a living. 8 of them were shot down by the descendants, and only 1 was left. It was normal. Speaking of this, her heart seemed to be hit hard by something. A truth seemed to be coming to the surface. Could it be that the coexistence of Shinjioli and her was considered as a disharmony between heaven and earth? Chaos in the natural law. That was why the outbreak of Zisha was triggered. She and he couldn't coexist in this world. No way. He was a god, but she was the devil master. At most, the gods and the demons were opposing each other. It couldn't be considered that there were 2 suns in the sky. The outbreak of Zisha this time might be due to other reasons, and not because of the coexistence of Shinjioli and her. Besides, 50,000 years ago, she and Shinjioli had coexisted for a long time, and it didn't trigger Zisha or anything. Obviously, this was not the reason. However, why did Shinjioli have to die? She was temporarily confused, so she was a little slow in making a move. She was almost hit by a black bone that suddenly appeared. Be careful. Shuailan pulled out his sword in time from behind and pushed the black bone away for her. Ning Xuemo finally came to her senses and was sweating. It was not the time to be absent-minded. It was not too late for her to go back to the ground and think about it slowly. She focused her mind again and rushed forward with Shuailan. With her leading the way, their speed was much faster. Seeing that the other side was in sight, Ning Xuemo breathed a sigh of relief. As long as she rushed for a few more minutes, she could leave this damn place. She didn't know what was going on, but this sea of bones always gave her an ominous illusion. She was eager to leave here, so she ran forward even faster. Finally, Ning Xuemo stepped on the ground with 1 foot. And the unforeseen event happened in an instant. Suddenly, the wind behind her was as fast as lightning. It felt like there was a sudden downpour between heaven and earth. There was no sign in advance. Countless sharp whistle-like noises came from all directions. This voice came too fast, so fast that no one could react in time. From the corner of his eyes, Ning Xuemo saw countless sharp black bones shooting towards him. They were so dense, and they were so close to each other that she didn't even have time to wave her sword to set up a light barrier to defend herself. She could only set up a barrier, unexpectedly, just as her fingers were forming a seal, her body was violently pushed. Her body flew out and landed on the shore. Almost at the same time, a series of popping sounds came from behind him, shocking him to the core. Ning Xuemo's heart sank. She gritted her teeth and turned around. Her expression changed drastically. In the forest of the Black Bone Sea, a black serpent made of countless black bones drilled out. The spikes on its body were like swords, and Shuailan was pierced by these spikes. His entire body was pierced by countless spikes, but not a single drop of blood flowed out from his body. However, his face quickly turned pale. The black snake was dragging him into the depths of the sea of bones. His pair of eyes looked at Ning Xuemo. He opened his mouth and only spat out 2 words, "Take care." Ning Xuemo's mind exploded, Shuailan. Almost without thinking, she jumped up and directly flew onto the back of the black serpent. She slashed at the black serpent with her sword. She wanted to kill the black serpent first. The indestructible sky splitter sword slashed on the black serpent's body, but sparks flew out. Unexpectedly, it only cut off one of the spikes. It didn't cause any other damage to the black serpent. Instead, it retreated even faster into the depths of the sea of bones. Chapter 18-19. Go quickly. It's useless. Shuailan finally spat out a few words. No, I must save you. Ning Xuemo reached out and grabbed his hand, wanting to pull his body away from the bone spur. However, she didn't expect that Shuailan's body had already become one with the bone spur. She tried to pull it out, but it didn't budge. Shuailan, bear with it. Ning Xuemo slashed the black bone beneath him with her sword. This time, she used all her strength. With a loud clang, she finally broke one of the bones. Shuailan let out a muffled groan. His body trembled as if his bones were the ones being chopped. Half of the bone that was cut was still stuck in his body, and blood was flowing out from the wound. Swoosh. The bone that was cut flew back in the blink of an eye and reconnected with the wound. How could this be? Ning Xuemo was stunned. Xuemo, don't waste your energy. Shuailan spoke again, go quickly. No. Ning Xuemo held his hand and didn't let go. She was thinking of all kinds of ways to save him while comforting him. Shuailan, hold on, I will think of a way. Think about the Ice Jade Fairy who is still waiting for you to get married. You can't disappoint her, right? Shuailan's face was already very pale, but when he heard the words Ice Jade Fairy, his lips curved up slightly. Ice Jade Fairy was very good, but he only had one woman in his heart. There was no room for a second woman. When he brought Ice Jade Fairy here, it was only to remove Ning Xuemo's guard and allow him to stay by her side. He looked at her. Xuemo, do you love me? Ning Xuemo froze. Shuailan smiled. If you don't love me, then let me go. Let go. How could he release Ning Xuemo? Once she loosened her grip, he would lose his life. She took a deep breath and said, Shuailan, listen to me. You're my friend. You always have been. I can't abandon my friends. I can't do that. Shuailan's gaze landed behind her. She was standing in front of the black bone snake and had once again stepped into the black bone sea. Behind her, a giant hand made of black bones was slowly taking shape. Xuemo, I don't want to be your friend. I only want to be your man. It's been like this for 3 lifetimes. So, if you don't love me, then let me go. Give me a release. Shui Lan's sword suddenly appeared in his hand. With a swoosh, the tip of the sword swept past his wrist. Ning Xuemo was fully focused on dealing with the black bones. She didn't expect that he would break his own wrist. When she reacted, only his broken hand was left in her hand. Shui Lan. Ning Xuemo's voice changed. She watched as the black bone snake dragged him into the depths of the abyssal bone forest. Momo, I hope that I won't meet you again in my next life. Shui Lan's voice sounded. It was weak but clear. Ning Xuemo's eyes turned red. She chased after him without caring about anything, but this time, the abyssal bone forest only gave way to the black bone snake. When the black bone snake passed by, the surrounding black bones immediately rushed over and blocked Ning Xuemo's path. If Ning Xuemo wanted to chase after him, she could only chop these black bones, but no matter how fast she chopped, she couldn't compare to the speed of the black snake retreating. She could only watch as Shui Lan's red figure went further and further away. The sun rises from the east, red clothes like fire. The spring flowers are gorgeous, the night is waning. Holding the beauty in my arms, my heart wavers. The past is hard to recall, the zither and zither are hard to reconcile. A sorrowful song came from the black bone sea. Chapter 1820. What he was singing was the song that Ning Xuemo had heard before. Tears streamed down Ning Xuemo's face, and she slashed at the black bones around her with all her might. Just as the song stopped, Shui Lan gave a long laugh. If you want to eat this sacrifice, I'm afraid it won't be so easy. Before the laughter ended, a loud bang was heard. The place where Shui Lan was at exploded, and a red fog rose up. That red fog flew in all directions, and wherever it went, those black bones seemed to be corroded by concentrated sulfuric acid, vanishing one after another. Ning Xuemo only felt a wave of air rushing towards her, and it swept her to the shore like a whirlwind. Mother Earth of Mythical Fire Palace had her eyes lowered, and she seemed to be waiting for something. Suddenly, her body trembled, and she trembled a few times. She quickly pulled back a tree root that was stretched into the ground as if she was scalded by fire. The tip of the snake-like tree root was now in a mess, and fresh blood was flowing out. Damn it! She had fallen for that little demon's trick. She wanted to catch that devil master with a bit of God's bloodline, and not that little demon. That little demon seemed to know everything, and she actually smeared the devil master's blood on her feet, causing her black snake to grab the wrong person. Since one of them was willing to sacrifice in place of another, she could not go and capture the demon lord anymore. What a pity! She had never truly tasted the flesh of a devil master, and it would definitely taste better than ordinary demons. She didn't expect to miss the opportunity just like that. Her blood-sucking, black snake-like tree root was still bleeding, and she trembled in pain. That little demon. That little demon had actually used her soul as a sacrifice to use such a killer move at the moment of her death. She had actually been injured as well. When the dust settled, a low growl came from the depths of the sea of black bones, and it gradually disappeared. The sea of black bones was slightly messy, and those black bones recovered slowly after being watered by the blood fog. They looked like they were in a mess. Meanwhile, that big red figure that had once followed beside her had disappeared, and he would never appear again. Shui Lan, she had only saved him once, and he had followed her for 3 lifetimes. He had missed her, wronged her, imprisoned her, but he had also protected her many times and saved her from danger many times. Even if he owed her, he had already paid her back. He loved her so much that it was like a moth flying into a flame. He loved her so much that he didn't care about anything else. She could treat him as her best friend, but she was unable to truly fall in love with him. in order to make him give up, she deliberately ignored him and provoked him. However, he had followed her without any complaints, and even died for her in the end. Shuilan, I will avenge you. I won't let you die in vain. Ning Xuema stood on the shore and looked at the sea of black bones. Her face was pale, and her originally black eyes gradually turned red. In the end, they were as red as the morning sun. She had come this time to ask for help, so she did everything according to Mother Earth's rules. He cleared the level normally, asked questions normally, and returned normally. He didn't even use much mana. Little Nianma was still waiting for her at home. If it was not necessary, she did not want to cause any trouble. She only wanted to get the information that she wanted. However, she did not expect that she would lose her friend when she took the normal path. She was already lonely in this world, and she did not expect that she would lose her only friend today. Did she eat her friend? Then, she would let the other party get the retribution. For this, she would do whatever it took. She raised her head and let out a long howl. Her howl shook the surroundings, and even the black bones that were as dense as a forest of swords trembled. Chapter 1821. She raised her head and let out a long howl. Her howl shook the surroundings, causing even the dense black bones to tremble. The Devil Lord's aura instantly erupted. Under extreme anger, her blood boiled, and the magic power in her body circulated rapidly. It gathered at a certain place. After a moment, it was as if a seal had been unlocked around her body. Suddenly, a golden red light burst out, illuminating the entire dark underground. Under the powerful aura, the black bones in the sea of black bones trembled and made a rustling sound. Some of the black bones automatically shrank back. Since they ate her friends, then they should all be buried together with her friends. Not a single one should be left alive. The sky splitter sword in Ning Xuema's hand shone brighter than the sun. With a swoosh, it was pushed towards the sea of black bones. Landslide and tsunami were not enough to describe the sound of the sea of black bones at this moment. There was a sentence recorded in the remnant of the demon god record. The great demon god war. Heaven and earth were overturned, the sun and the moon sank, the mountains and rivers collapsed, and the three realms were overturned. Because it was too long ago, no one knew what kind of situation it was at that time. After Ning Xuema was reborn in this continent, she had always been low-key. However, within 3 years, she had swept through the 6 realms. She did not know how many real experts she had fought, but no one could win against her. If one wanted to make the 6 realms submit, they would only be empty words if they were not strong enough. After she was reborn, although she did not have the memories from 50,000 years ago, she still had more than half of the power that belonged to the Devil Lord. Although she could not remember the moves she used in the past, the magic power in her body was almost the same as before. She was like a dormant dragon. Once she was truly angered, the world would turn upside down. Half an hour later, the dense forest of black bones had all disappeared, leaving only a thick layer of black bones that could no longer be gathered together. It was like a broken wall after a hurricane. Ning Xuema stood in the middle of the pile of broken black bones. Her ruby-red eyes looked around the pile of broken bones. Where was the black snake that ate Shuilan? When she was destroying the black bone sea, she had already noticed the appearance of the black snake. It was the main culprit, so she would not let it go. She would skin that monster alive, grind its bones, and scatter its ashes as a sacrifice to Shuilan's soul in heaven. She destroyed all the black bones, but she didn't see the shadow of the black snake. Could it have burrowed into the ground? The corners of her lips curled up slightly as her eyes flashed with bloodthirsty killing intent. Nothing could get away unscathed after killing her friend. She would find that monster even if she had to dig 8 feet into the ground. The sky splitter sword flashed in the sky, and the glaring red light once again lit up the entire space. In Mythical Fire Palace, Mother Earth was currently enduring the pain to heal her injuries. She wouldn't get injured easily, and once she got injured, she wouldn't recover easily either. She closed her eyes slightly and slowly put down the tree root that she had pulled out. She hissed softly and the tree root silently drilled into the ground and swam towards the sea of bones. That sea of bones was both a barrier to stop the intruders and a place for her to absorb. Only there could her roots recover faster. That little demon. That scoundrel little demon. He actually dared to use such a ruthless method to hurt her, Mother Earth. It was a pity he was already dead. Otherwise, she would have let that little demon have a taste of her methods. She had lived for so long, and no one dared to be so disrespectful to her. Chapter 1822. So painful. The lower half of her legs were actually countless knotted tree roots. When she endured the pain, the tree roots that were coiled around the entire hall also extended and shrunk like squirming snakes. She was about to circulate her technique and meditate when she suddenly sensed something. She suddenly opened her eyes wide. She looked outside. There seemed to be flames surging into the sky. That fire wasn't an ordinary fire, it was the red lotus night fire that could burn everything. That fire was bright red and dazzling like gemstones. It was like the flames of a phoenix's nirvana, and it stung Mother Earth who was used to the darkness. What was going on? Before she could come back to her senses, she heard a sound that was like a landslide or a tsunami. That sea of black bones was closely related to her, so if it was truly under attack, she would be able to sense it in time. Her sea of nutrients. Her eyes flashed with a sharp light. That little devil master actually dared to destroy her sea of nutrients. She originally couldn't hurt that little devil master because of her promise, but now that she had sent herself to provoke her, what was there to be polite about? She wanted to let this little girl know what it meant to not provoke someone she couldn't provoke. Her finger moved, and countless tree roots burst out from her body and burrowed into the ground. Pft. Bang! Swoosh! Countless strange sounds came from the bottom of her feet, and countless black snakes burrowed out from the ground. Every black snake was 7 to 8 yards tall, and every black snake looked similar to the one that had dragged away Shuailan. The only difference was in size. There were 17 to 18 of these black snakes that had appeared, and they surrounded Ning Shuama in the center. Violent killing intent spread out from these snakes, and it seemed like they were going to freeze everything in the surroundings. Had she poked the snake's nest? Ning Shuama narrowed her eyes, and that pair of gemstone-like eyes revealed a bloodthirsty ruthlessness. Then let's get rid of them all in one go. Heaven Splitter's sword in her hand burst into flames again, and she rushed towards the snake that was closest to her. That snake wasn't afraid of this. To be honest, it wasn't afraid of anything. In this world, apart from explosions made from soul power, no other weapon, no matter how sharp, would be able to harm them. Those who could break through so many obstacles and come to her Livefire Palace were all extraordinary characters. The reason why they obeyed her rules was because her strength was extremely shocking. No one could truly contend against her. The main perverted rule of Mother Earth was that a person could only ask her a question once in their lifetime. Once they came for the second time, it meant that they were willing to be her food. There was also a price to pay for asking questions for the first time. For example, when crossing that sea of black bones, 1/3 of one's blood would be sucked away. Mother Earth's perverted rule that he could only come once was usually explained when he was about to leave. Therefore, for those who had come here once, as long as they didn't meet a huge problem that they couldn't solve, they wouldn't come here again. Ning Shuama had come here once 50,000 years ago, but she didn't have the memories from 50,000 years ago, so she came here recklessly. She didn't know that this was her second time here, and she also didn't know that in Mother Earth's eyes, she was already her food, those people who came for the second time weren't willing to be food, and they would usually fight to the death for a while. However, no one could defend against the attacks of the black snakes, and they all became food in Mother Earth's mouth. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.